Chapter 680. Ian's love for wine began when he was young. His father was a leather shoemaker, and after the war, he ran a small leather shoe workshop in Chaos City, specializing in custom-made leather shoes. He would buy a bottle of wine at the end of every month and place it on the windowsill. He would drink a small glass every night before going to bed. The young Ian was very curious about the purplish-red liquid in the glass. Finally, one day, when his father was out, he climbed onto the windowsill and carefully poured half a glass of wine into it. The wine cost dozens of copper coins per bottle, and it tasted a little sour and astringent. It was only brewed in a small, immature winery. However, at the time, Ian felt that it was the best wine he had ever tasted in his life. It was as if a door was slowly opening in front of him. The young Ian couldn't hold his liquor well, and passed out after half a glass. Naturally, he was beaten up by his father when he came back. However, once this door was opened, it couldn't be closed again. From then on, he and his father played a game of hide-and-seek about wine for many years. It was not until he brought home the first bottle of wine, filled 2 glasses with wine for the first time openly, and sat opposite his father that the game of hide-and-seek truly ended. Therefore, many years later, many people asked him why he had thought of establishing buffet banks. His answer was that it was to be able to drink wine in a fair and square manner. Such a simple goal and wish supported him all the way to where he was now. Ever since he was no longer short of money, he took out a portion of the profits from the bank to build his winery. He had always believed that wine should be more than just that, so he established the Buffett Winery. An investment that was ridiculed by countless people in the beginning began to make profits 20 years later, and 30 years later, it became one of the most renowned wines on the Norland continent. The wine produced by Buffett Banks was known as liquid gold, and was still very popular due to its exorbitant price. Even the royal family of the Roth Empire spent a huge sum of money to obtain a batch of premium wine from Buffett Banks every year. Ian was serious about drinking wine. Buffett Banks only produced 3 barrels of premium V-grade wine every year. 1 barrel was kept on the hill, and the other 2 barrels were sent to Ian. This was the best wine in the world. Even the king of the Roth Empire and the queen of the elves couldn't taste it. However, Ian narrowed his eyes as he looked at the steak in front of him and took a whiff of the aroma of beef and red wine wafting toward him. The aroma of the wine is so mellow and rich. What's more, this is the smell of the beef after it has been cooked. The fragrance of the wine has already spread a lot, but it can still reach this level. It's simply incredible. Ian had a look of disbelief on his face. During the construction of the winery, he would go to the wine cellar almost every day, guiding the Buffett Winery to its peak step by step. There was no one in the world who knew wine better than him. No, if that's all, it's not enough. Ian shook his head. He was still very confident in his winery's wine. This was a fine wine that had been brewed by countless top-notch winemakers, so there was no way that it would be inferior to the wine brewed by a restaurant owner. "Sir, you can use a knife to cut the steak before eating," Yabamiya kindly reminded. "All right." Ian nodded before picking up his knife and fork, and gently slicing the beef. The tender beef was easily sliced open by the knife, and bright red wine and meat juices immediately seeped out. The aroma of the beef and red wine instantly erupted into the air. This aroma! How is this possible? Ian was completely rooted to the spot. The aroma of the wine had been a little bland in the past, but after the beef's aroma erupted, he was completely unable to deceive himself. What kind of wine is this? Which winery produced it? Ian immediately raised his head with an agitated expression as he turned to Yabamiya, who was just about to move on to the next table. What did you say, sir?" Yabamiya was looking at Ian with a perplexed expression. He didn't know why this seemingly benevolent customer had suddenly flared up. All of the surrounding customers also turned to look at them. Isn't that old Master Ian? I didn't think that he would be eating at Amy's. Indeed. Ever since young Mistress Hill became the leader of the Buffett family, old Master Ian rarely appears in public. But what's the situation now? Could it be that the food doesn't suit old Master Ian's taste? Some of the customers recognized Ian, and this immediately caused a small commotion. Meg, who was cooking in the kitchen, also looked out of the restaurant when he heard the commotion. He couldn't help but look at Ian in surprise. He didn't think that old Master Ian would also be here. However, after thinking about it, the steam engine issue was no small matter. Perhaps young Mistress Hill couldn't make up her mind, so she asked old Master Buffett to come instead. This wasn't something that was difficult to understand. However, it seemed like old Master Ian wasn't very satisfied with the food. I mean, what kind of wine was added to the steak? Which winery produced it? Ian also realized that he seemed to be a little too agitated, so he lowered his voice slightly. I don't know what kind of wine boss used, Yabamiya replied in a soft voice as he looked toward the kitchen for help. This is a home-brewed wine, and it didn't come from any winery. Do you have any objections? Or is the steak not to your taste? Meg came out of the kitchen with a smile as he looked at Ian. Home-brewed wine. Ian looked at Meg before looking around the restaurant again. He shook his head and said, "This kind of wine can't be brewed in a place like this. I only use home-brewed wine for the steak." Meg was still smiling. This old man was indeed a connoisseur. The brewing of top-grade grape wine required strict control over every step, and the various equipment required would take up a lot of space. Her place was not even suitable to be used as a wine cellar. All right, I don't care who brewed this wine. Ian waved his hand, and pointed at Meg with a hint of anger in his voice. But you're using such top-grade wine to cook. Doesn't your conscience hurt? I think that only top-grade ingredients can match the most delicious food. This wine goes perfectly with the black pepper steak. Meg shook his head with a smile. Perfectly. That's blasphemy to this wine. Do you know how rare such top-grade wine is? Even the best winemaker can't guarantee that he'll be able to brew it again, but you're using it to cook. Chapter 681. In Chaos City, not only was the Buffett Banks renowned throughout the world, the Buffett Winery was also renowned as the best winery on the entire Norland continent. This was the pride of Chaos City, and almost everyone knew about it. Wine wasn't invented by Ian Buffett, but it was renowned throughout the world because of the Buffett Winery. It was popular among the nobles, and the purple liquid swirling in the glass had also become a symbol of class. As such, Ian Buffett was known as the father of wine, which was a testament to everyone's approval of him. However, Ian was now roaring at Meg in a fit of rage because Meg had used this wine to cook. Where did this wine come from, Mr. Mac? Why is old Master Ian so angry? I tasted it yesterday, and I knew that this wine was no ordinary wine. Old Master Ian's reaction today is quite similar to mine. Don't be a hindsight. Setting everything else aside, this incident is enough to show Mr. Mac's attitude toward food. He's using such a precious wine to cook steak, and he's making it so delicious. The price of 1,500 copper coins is far too generous. All of the customers were discussing quietly among themselves as they looked at Meg and Ian with interest. This legendary old master had always been known for his benevolence, and there weren't many situations that could make him fly into a rage. Beef, red wine, and black pepper are all top-notch ingredients, and only then can a perfect steak be made. Hence, I don't think there's any blasphemy involved. In my eyes, red wine is just as precious as beef and black pepper. Meg looked at Ian with a serious expression. He had thought that this old man was here to inspect him and discuss business, but he didn't think that he would destroy his restaurant as soon as the dishes were served. However, if it were his grandfather, his reaction would probably be similar if he saw such good red wine being used to make steak. People who loved wine couldn't accept wasting good wine. Of course, in Meg's heart, using red wine to cook steak wasn't a waste. Without such a high-quality wine, how could he make the most delicious steak? After all, cooking was his main occupation. Good wine has a soul. How can you compare it with beef and black pepper? Ian glared at Meg and waved his hand, saying, "Go, bring me a bottle of this wine." "How much wine do you have left in your store?" "I'll take all of it. I'll charge you the price of the most expensive wine in the Buffett winery." The guests gasped when they heard this. The most expensive wine from the Buffett winery was sold for 200,000 copper coins per bottle, and this was the price of the winery itself. Generally, after a few rounds on the market, the price would soar to more than 300,000 copper coins. Moreover, there was no market for such wine. There's not a lot of wine, so it's only used to cook steaks. It's not for sale. Meg shook his head with a smile. Do you know how much a bottle of Buffett's most expensive wine costs? As long as one bottle of wine was sold, it would be equivalent to 200 steaks. Marinating 200 steaks would require more than one bottle of red wine. You'll be struck by lightning for wasting such a precious treasure. Ian was fuming with rage. He had thought that the owner of the store would have a good brain, but now it seemed that the owner was stubborn and couldn't even calculate such a small amount. The wine is not for sale. Please don't force it. If you want to drink, the restaurant provides beer, and you can order freely. If there's nothing else, I'll continue cooking. The other guests are still waiting. Meg nodded politely and turned to the kitchen. 200,000 per bottle, and Mr. Mac rejected it. I've only admired a few people in my life, and now Mr. Mac is one of them. He's the conscience of the gourmet world. Yeah, those who complain about the price of food, don't they have a conscience? That's 200,000 per bottle of wine, and Mr. Mac used it to cook steaks. Well, waiter, please give me a black pepper steak. All of the customers in the restaurant burst into an uproar at the sight of Mag's departing figure, and they were all struck by a sense of awe and veneration. You little bastard. You. Ian abruptly rose to his feet and prepared to chase after Meg. Master. Please calm down, Master. It's not good for your health to be affected by your anger. Brooker hurriedly rose to his feet and held Ian back. It had been many years since he had seen his master so angry, and he consoled, this wine only has a slightly stronger aroma. There's no way that there's wine in this world that's better than the wine brewed by the Buffett winery. Besides, he doesn't look like he's capable of brewing good wine. Perhaps he's only used some tricks to enhance the aroma. After all, he's a chef. Ian looked at Brooker, and thought to himself for a moment before sitting back down in his seat. Brewing wine is a delicate process. Without several decades of experience, it's impossible to brew good wine. He's a chef, not a winemaker. This wine smells good, but it doesn't necessarily taste good. Besides, I've never heard of using wine to cook, so it's definitely going to taste very mediocre. Ian hesitated momentarily at the sight of the delectable beef before him before picking up his fork and placing the piece of beef that he had just sliced into his mouth. He opened his mouth and took a light bite, and delicious gravy flowed out of the beef. The aroma of the black pepper was just right, and the delectable flavor danced on the tip of his tongue. A smile appeared on Ian's face. This flavor was simply unfathomable. He wasn't a picky eater, but the chef of the Moreton Manor had to be the best chef in Chaos City. In terms of deliciousness, he had never tasted beef as delicious as this one. After chewing carefully, Ian's expression abruptly changed. Aside from the delectable flavor of the beef, the sweet aroma of the wine was like a hidden treasure that had suddenly appeared before him. It was an irresistible attack of sweetness. It was not overshadowed by the deliciousness of the beef and black pepper, nor did it appear to be abrupt or unique. Instead, it blended perfectly into the beef, making the beef even more delicious and mellow, giving it a mellow texture. This was the most mellow and delicious wine that he had ever tasted. Even though it was only used as a spice, it still couldn't conceal its delectable flavor. In comparison, even the 3 barrels of V-grade wine produced by the Buffett winery each year paled in comparison. There was nothing to nitpick about the delectable flavor of the steak. It had completely subverted all of Ian's expectations of beef. Every single cell in his body was cheering with joy, and he was completely in awe of this delectable flavor. He was even suddenly feeling a little relieved. Only the best wine could match such delectable beef. This smells so good. Chapter 682. Everyone had thought that Ian was going to fly into a rage, but all of them were quite surprised to see this. Just a moment ago, Ian was looking like he was going to teach Meg a lesson, but not only was he praising the steak from the bottom of his heart, he was also enjoying his meal with a knife and fork in hand. However, smiles soon appeared on everyone's faces. That made sense. After tasting Mr. Mac's food, everyone was going to worship him as if he were the chef god, so there was no way they were going to get angry at him. If they really did piss him off and put him on the restaurant's blacklist, that would be a massive loss. In the kitchen, a smile had also appeared on Meg's face. Delicious food could dispel all doubts, and that was why he was so confident. Aisha, your warnings always come true. Yabamiya patted Sally's arm with a vibrant smile on her face. That's the strongest warning I can make when I'm faced with delicious food. Sally also had a smile on her face. Well. Brooker was also looking at Ian with a peculiar expression. This was a very rare situation. His master didn't often lose his temper, but if he did, it would take him at least half a day to calm down. Who would have thought that after just a short while, there was no trace of anger on Ian's face? Of course, it was even rarer for the old master to say such words that were like slapping himself in the face. Is this steak really that delicious? It's able to make master so obsessed with it. This owner is way too good. Brooker gulped down his saliva at the sight of the steak in front of Ian, and the rich aroma wafting toward him made him want to swallow as well. Here's your Yangzhou fried rice and tofu pudding, please enjoy. Right at this moment, Yabamiya placed the Yangzhou fried rice in front of Brooker, as well as the sweet and savory tofu pudding. Thank you. Brooker nodded, and his eyes were completely drawn to the colorful fried rice in front of him. Even though the aroma emanating from the fried rice wasn't as rich as that of the steak, the combination of all of the ingredients was still very enticing to him. The aroma was slightly lighter, but it also gave off a different flavor. All of the ingredients had been sliced to the size of grains of rice, and they were fried together with the rice. The golden eggs were perfectly enshrouded around the grains of rice, and each grain of rice was very distinct from the other ingredients. Brooker had never heard of anything like this, but the aroma of the fried rice was already tempting to him. He picked up a spoon and spooned it into his mouth. The fried rice was still a little hot, but Brooker wasn't bothered in the slightest. His taste buds, and at the same time, his brain. The fragrance of chopped green onions and eggs assailed his nostrils. The grain-sized shrimp and ham had a delicate texture, and the egg-wrapped rice was full of sweetness after being chewed. The taste of the various ingredients melted in his mouth, constantly attacking his taste buds. Even after swallowing, the fragrance still filled his mouth. What's to his stomach? How could there be such delicious food in this world? Is this really rice to be to him? Yangzhou fried rice was already quite cheap on the menu, but it still cost 600 copper coins per plate, which made him feel like the owner of this restaurant had set a steep price. However, Brooker felt like the price was far too high. All of the ingredients were extremely delicious, and even though they had all been sliced to the size of grains of rice, he could still taste all of the delicious flavors in his mouth, and it was truly incredible. He was Ian's butler, as well as the butler with the highest status in the Buffett family. His monthly salary was naturally quite high, and he even owned 2 shops under his name. He had already made up his mind that he was going to come back to eat this delicious Yangzhou fried rice again when he had some free time. If he could eat a bowl of this every day, then there would be nothing more he could ask for in life. Ding! Ian's knife and Brooker's spoon came into contact with the empty plate almost at the exact same time. The two of them looked at each other, and Brooker silently picked up the plate before licking the remaining 2 grains of rice. Useless. Ian pursed his lips as he looked at the small remaining pepper on the plate, and he silently picked it up and placed it into his mouth. A sheepish smile appeared on Brooker's face. He didn't think that Ian's actions were much more elegant than his own, but he could only keep such thoughts to himself. "Are you satisfied with your meal, master?" Brooker asked with a smile. However, he then felt like he had just asked a stupid question. He had never seen Ian eat everything on his plate so cleanly, not even leaving a single side dish behind. "I've never tasted such delicious beef before. It's just like the wine, it's the best of the best." Ian nodded as he put down his knife and fork. "Then what about this wine?" Brooker asked in a quiet voice with a slightly nervous expression. If Meg's wine could compare with the Buffett winery's wine, then that was definitely not good news. Brooker's voice wasn't very loud, but all of the customers sitting beside him were listening intently. Most of the customers present were extremely wealthy, but none of them were as knowledgeable as Ian when it came to wine, so his evaluation was naturally the most authoritative. Ian contemplated momentarily before nodding. "I've only tasted the wine that was added to the beef, but judging from its aroma and texture after heating, the quality of this wine is not inferior to the A-grade wine brewed by the Buffett winery. In fact, it may even taste better. A-grade wine is the highest-rated wine sold by the Buffett winery, and each bottle costs at least 200,000 copper coins. My God! That's way too extravagant. He's cooking a steak with an A-grade wine, as expected of Mr. Mac, Mr. Mac. I thought that beer was already the pinnacle of Mr. Mac's winemaking, but it looks like I still underestimated him. He's driving all of the other industries to death." Ian didn't bother to lower his voice as he spoke, and his words instantly created a stir in the restaurant. All of the customers were looking at the steak on their plates with completely different expressions. Black pepper, A-grade wine, and the meat of a 4th-tier magic beast, Ironhide bull, this was no longer just an ordinary steak. This was an extremely expensive steak. After taking a single bite, the aroma of the steak was no longer that of gold coins. Instead, it was that of dragon coins. Of course, money was far more important than the taste. However, knowing that this seemingly ordinary piece of steak was made with such top-notch ingredients, he felt a lot more comfortable after taking a bite. It even had the effect of being delicious. He does have a weird temper, but he really is a fair old man. Meg nodded slightly upon hearing Ian's words. The fact that he was able to give such a high evaluation of the steak was a testament to his expertise in wine. Chapter 683. What kind of brain is this tofu pudding? Could it be the brain of some kind of magic beast? Ian looked at the tofu pudding before him. The white tofu pudding was placed in a small bowl, with chopped pickled vegetables and other side dishes placed on top of it. A spoonful of orange sauce had been poured over the tofu pudding, and the aroma of the sauce and side dishes combined with the aroma of beans wafted toward Ian. He had just finished his steak, and the refreshing aroma of beans was a pleasant surprise to him. The white tofu pudding was completely different from the brain that he had envisioned, and he didn't feel nauseous in the slightest. It looks very appetizing, and the aroma is very refreshing as well. It should taste quite good. Ian nodded before looking at the tofu pudding in front of Brooke with a smile, and said, "Brooke, you're not getting any younger, so you should cut down on sweets. It's not good for your health." "Master, this is my only hobby. If I can't even eat sweets, I'll feel like something is missing from my life." Brooke smiled as he looked at the sweet tofu pudding in front of him with an elated expression. The tofu pudding was square and white, and there was a layer of reddish-golden syrup on top of it. It looked like a piece of pure white jade wrapped in amber. When he picked up the bowl, the tofu pudding wobbled a little. It looked very springy, and there was even steam rising from the syrup. The aroma of the heated syrup mingled with the aroma of beans, and he could already taste the sweetness in his mouth even before he had eaten it. For a dessert lover like him, this was simply too alluring. The two of them picked up their spoons at almost the exact same moment before placing a spoonful of tofu pudding into their mouths. This flavor. Brooke's eyes immediately widened. The tofu pudding and the syrup melted in his mouth, and in contrast with the usual sticky syrup, this reddish-golden syrup was sweet but not greasy, and it didn't overpower the tofu pudding's natural aroma in the slightest. He swallowed the tofu pudding down his throat, and the faint aroma of beans lingered in his mouth. Brooke loved sweets, and he had eaten countless types of desserts. He would always carry a bag of sweets in his pocket, and it had already become a habit for him to have one every now and then. When she first started working for Ian, she would often be so busy that she didn't have time to eat. When she was hungry, she would eat a candy. Gradually, it became a habit. If she didn't eat some candy every day, she would feel uncomfortable the whole day. Even though he had tried all kinds of desserts, he still fell in love with the sweet tofu pudding after tasting it. He felt as if he had suddenly fallen into a delicious trap, surrounded by countless sweet syrups. He plunged in, wantonly rolling and tasting inside, enjoying the smoothness and sweetness of this moment alone. What a delightful taste. Ian looked at the empty spoon in front of him with elation on his face. The white and tender tofu pudding was wrapped in an orange-red sauce, and there was a bit of chopped pickled mustard on top. As soon as he put it into his mouth, it melted without even chewing. The fragrant and sweet tofu pudding, savory pickled mustard, and sauce blended together perfectly. All kinds of flavors wreaked havoc in his mouth, and after swallowing, his mouth was filled with a faint bean flavor that was filled with a refreshing feeling. Eating this savory tofu pudding after finishing the steak was an indescribable feeling. The white porcelain spoons clinked against the sides of the bowls, and one spoonful of tofu pudding after another was shoveled into their mouths. Sweet tofu pudding is the king of all desserts. I've never tasted anything as delicious as this. This is an irresistible delicacy. Brooker licked the syrups in his bowl clean before putting it down with an expression of awe and satisfaction on his face. It was as if his life had been elevated. Ian put down his bowl and shook his head as he looked at Brooker. You should try the savory tofu pudding before you say that. Treating tofu pudding as a dessert is an insult to tofu pudding. Tofu pudding should be a delicious snack, not a sweet dessert. Master, I respect you very much, but desserts are my religion. Sweet tofu pudding has completely replaced desserts in my heart, so please don't insult it. Brooker looked at Ian with a serious expression and said, also, tofu pudding already has a slightly sweet flavor, and adding the syrups in it maximizes that flavor. I think this is the correct way to make tofu pudding delicious. Salty tofu pudding is the only thing that's going to ruin its flavor. As your boss, I have to correct your erroneous beliefs. Tofu pudding should be eaten salty. Ian also wore a serious expression. Master, you may be my boss, but you can't change my mind about sweet tofu pudding. I'm willing to live and die with sweet tofu pudding. Brooker wore a determined expression. Ian stared at Brooker for a long while before placing his hand on the table. Brooker immediately rose to his feet, but he still had no intention of backing down. Then I'll also stand by my decision. Ian harumphed coldly before rising to his feet and making his way toward the kitchen. I respect your decision. Brooker heaved a sigh of relief, and he suddenly felt as if his legs were about to give out from under him. He had worked for Ian for several decades, and this was the first time he had ever opposed him. Who would have thought that it would be over a bowl of tofu pudding? Boss. Mag, right? The steak and savory tofu pudding are very delicious, but I still want to discuss something with you. Can you sell me a bottle of your wine? I only want one bottle, and I'll sell it to you at the same price as before. Ian made his way to the entrance of the kitchen, and turned to Meg as he spoke. I'll sell it. I'll sell it. Meg was roaring internally, but he still shook his head with a smile as he said, My apologies, but wine is not for sale. I'll add another 100,000. Ian looked into Meg's eyes. I'm not selling. Meg shook his head with a smile. He felt as if his heart were bleeding. That was 300,000 copper coins he was talking about. The cost of buying a bottle of wine from the system was only a few hundred copper coins, yet the system was killing off such a lucrative business opportunity. What a massive waste of resources. System, why don't we set the winemaking method as the reward for our next mission? I'll be able to do it myself, so I don't want to tire you out every day. Meg was grinning internally. Mission rewards are random, but as long as the host works hard to complete the mission, there's still hope that you'll be rewarded with the winemaking method, the system replied. Do you think I'm an idiot? If I give you the winemaking method, then I'll have built my winery for nothing. A line of text quickly flashed past Meg's attention. Interesting. Mr. Mac, you're welcome to visit my winery next time. I'll treat you to some of my wine. A smile reappeared on Ian's face as he looked at Meg. You're far too kind. If the opportunity arises, I'll be sure to visit you. Meg also nodded with a smile. He wanted to discuss with the old man whether they should hold a lunch auction together. On Earth, Old Man Buffett's lunches were all auctioned off for hundreds of thousands of dollars each time. Even though this Old Man Buffett didn't invest in the stock market, he was just as legendary as Old Man Buffett on Earth. If news of this were to spread, the stock market would most likely explode. Only that old man could come up with such a way of earning money when someone else was treating him to a meal and he still had to give him money. Chapter 684. Master, are you worried that Mr. Mac's wine will affect the winery? Brooker asked with a concerned expression. Ever since they had gotten into the horse-drawn carriage, Ian hadn't said a single word. Competition exists in all industries, and it's always beneficial to the development of an industry. If his wine really does pose a threat to our winery, then those guys who keep telling me that they've already done their best will know what to do instead of sleeping on women's bellies. Ian shook his head with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Then, Brooker was rather perplexed. I'm thinking about whether we should make him the manager of the winery so that he can improve the quality of our wine. An eager smile appeared on Ian's face. A concerned look appeared on Brooker's face as he said, But master, all of the winemakers in the winery are extremely experienced. If we make Mr. Mac the manager, they'll most likely be disgruntled. It's too risky. Ian smiled and said, If they're not as good as him, then they can keep it to themselves. I've always looked at the people I employ based on their abilities. Otherwise, the winery wouldn't have been able to grow to such a scale. All of my old friends who started this business with me back in the day were only able to manage one shop at most. But young Mistress Hill is in charge of the winery now, so... Brooker said in a quiet voice. There's no rush. Young Mistress Hill has been very busy recently. However, if she succeeds, then I'll go to that guy again, and he won't be able to turn me down, Ian replied with a smile. Father, why didn't you bring Mother with you? It's not very appropriate for the two of us to sneak out for supper. Vivian jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage first, and looked at Michael with a smile, completely devoid of any shame. Michael also jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage with a smile, and said, I told your mother about this, and she said that she doesn't want to eat supper as she's afraid of gaining weight. She also doesn't want to eat spicy food as she's afraid that something will grow on her face, so only the two of us came. Vivian heaved a faint sigh, and said, That's a real pity. Mother missed out on the delicious spicy grilled fish just like that. Next time, you have to tell her that she can eat a bowl of tofu pudding after the spicy grilled fish, and she'll be able to recover all of her lost weight. On top of that, her skin will become even fairer and more supple. There's such a thing. I'll bring one back for your mother. She'll love it. Michael's eyes lit up. Vivian looked at Michael with a smile, and said, Father, you're out for a meal with your precious daughter, but you're only thinking about your wife. You're doing me a lot of harm. Okay. Order whatever you want to eat today. If you can't finish it, take it home and continue eating. Michael smiled helplessly. If you say so, then I won't hold back. Vivian's eyes lit up as she strode toward the restaurant. It was almost 9 o'clock. The restaurant was less crowded, and there were some empty seats. Vivian opened the door and entered, followed by Michael. All of the customers in the restaurant faltered slightly at the sight of Michael before hurriedly standing up to greet him. None of them had thought that the city lord would suddenly appear here. There's no need to greet me, I'm only here to eat. Michael waved his hand with a smile, and gestured for everyone to take a seat. Could it be that young Mistress Vivian is the city lord's daughter? Yabamiya looked at Vivian with a surprised expression as she sat down across from Michael. Vivian raised her hand, and turned to Yabamiya with an excited expression as she said, Here's a large insanely spicy grilled fish. Father, we should be able to finish it, right? Vivian turned to Michael. This insanely spicy grilled fish. Michael mused to himself. He hadn't tried insanely spicy grilled fish before, but judging from the super spicy grilled fish last time, it most likely wasn't something that he could handle. However, at the sight of Vivian's excited expression, he hesitated momentarily before nodding as he said, Sure, we can take it home if we can't finish it. Has the black pepper steak been released yet? Michael asked with a smile as he turned to Yabamiya, who had already arrived at the table. Yabamiya nodded with a smile, and replied, That's right, it was released today. Is that the steak from last night? Vivian's interest was also immediately piqued. That's right. Yabamiya nodded after a brief moment of contemplation. Vivian clapped her hands together and said, Then I'll also have a black pepper steak. I was almost drooling at the sight of it last night, I have to try it today. Michael turned to Vivian with a perplexed expression, and asked, Didn't you already order a large insanely spicy grilled fish? That won't stop me from eating my steak. I skipped dinner just for this meal, Vivian replied with a sly smile. Little girl. A doting smile appeared on Michael's face as he turned to Yabamiya, and said, Let's do as she says, 2 black pepper steaks, and 1 large insanely spicy grilled fish. All right, please wait a moment. Yabamiya nodded with a smile, but there was a hint of envy in her eyes. She really was blessed to have a father who doted on her so much. Hello, big sister Vivian, Uncle City Lord. Amy greeted with a smile as she held Ugly Duckling in one hand and Anna's hand in the other. Amy, who's this? Vivian turned to Anna with a curious expression. This little elven girl appeared to be very gentle and quiet, and she was also very adorable and intricate. She's Big Sister Anna, Amy introduced. Mag looked at Vivian, who was chatting with Amy and Anna, and then his gaze fell on Michael. This city lord was very straightforward and easygoing, and he was quite fond of him. However, He didn't know if he was here to have supper with his daughter, or if he was here for the steam engine. The 2 black pepper steaks were served first. Oh! This is so delicious. Vivian cut off a piece of beef and put it into her mouth, upon which a blissful smile appeared on her face. It seems to be even more delicious than yesterday. As expected, it's even better in Mr. Mac's own restaurant. Beat deserved to lose. Michael couldn't help but praise the dish after taking a bite. After finishing the beef, a massive spicy grilled fish was placed in front of the 2 of them, and it took up almost the entire table. Michael reflexively scooted back half a meter in his chair in the face of the overwhelming spiciness. Just the spiciness alone was enough to make him want to cry. This was no ordinary spiciness, it was insanely spicy. It smells so good. Vivian rushed forward with an excited expression and fanned herself with her hands before nodding with satisfaction. She picked up a piece of fish with her chopsticks and dipped it into the broth before putting it into her mouth. She chewed and swallowed with an elated expression, then immediately picked up another piece of fish and put it into her mouth. She couldn't stop herself at all. It's not spicy. Chapter 685. Yes. Michael's face immediately became flushed, and it was as if flames were about to erupt from his eyes. He held his tongue for a long while before finally swallowing, and immediately turned to Yabamiya as he said, "Give me a glass of beer with ice." "All right." Yabamiya quickly strode toward the kitchen. Not everyone could stomach the insanely spicy level. "Father, are you all right?" Vivian asked as she ate her grilled fish with a sly smile on her face as she turned to Michael. Michael accepted the glass of beer that Yabamiya handed to him, and downed most of the glass in one go. Only then did he feel the scorching sensation in his throat disappear, and his expression eased slightly as he heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at Vivian with a wry expression and said, "You're such a scammer, how can you possibly stomach this insanely spicy level?" Vivian took a large bite of the fish before turning to Michael with a confused expression. "Why can't I eat anymore? I think the insanely spicy level is the most delicious level of spicy grilled fish. Ever since I've tasted the insanely spicy level, I feel like all other levels of spiciness are too mediocre, and they're completely tasteless." "All right, then eat some more. Be careful of the fish bones." Michael shook his head in a resigned manner before downing the entire glass of beer in one go. He then gestured for Yabamiya to get him another glass. He couldn't stomach this insanely spicy grilled fish, but he was more than happy to have another glass of this delicious cold beer. It was the closing time at 9 a.m. Mag waited for 2 minutes for the customers to finish the food on the table before he started to clear the place. Michael turned to Meg with a smile and said, "Mr. Mac, I heard from Dykes that you have a business deal that you'd like to make with the City Lord's castle. Would it be all right for me to come and take a look?" A smile appeared on Mag's face as he replied, "The City Lord has come in person, so there's no reason for me to turn you down. If you're not in a hurry to go home, young Mistress Vivian, you can enjoy your grilled fish here and play with Amy and Anna for a while. Take your time, I still have half a fish to eat," Vivian said without raising her head. She flipped the half-eaten fish over and continued to eat. "You can go back today and come back tomorrow morning to tidy up." Meg turned to look at Yabamiya and Sally. He then said a few words to Amy before leading Michael to the room next to the restaurant. A few lights illuminated the empty room, and the small train in the corner was quite eye-catching. Michael circled the steam locomotive and asked curiously, "This is a steam locomotive? Can you really run with such a steel-like appearance?" Meg opened the lid of the boiler. As he added coal, he said, "This steam locomotive converts the heat energy from burning coal into a controllable mechanical energy. Then, by pushing the connecting rod back and forth, it drives the small train forward. It doesn't need any external traction and can run on its own. It can also drive many carriages to move. Only coal is needed. Michael walked forward and bent down to pick up a piece of coal. He crushed it into black powder in his hand, confirming that it was indeed coal. Currently, the steam engine can only use coal, but if there are more efficient alternatives in the future, it might be able to be used. Meg nodded. He didn't say anything definite. After all, this was a magical world, and there might be more efficient and cheaper energy sources. Michael looked at the steam locomotive with interest. Can I try it? Of course, Mr. Castellan, please get on. Meg nodded with a smile. He ignited the boiler, and white steam spewed out from the chimney. He climbed onto the locomotive, and when the pressure on the barometer reached the threshold, he pushed the rod, and the steam engine began to move forward. Michael looked down at the locomotive rolling forward on the tracks, and his eyes lit up. If the feedback that the Hater team had given him about the steam engine was as vague as an attic in the sky, then sitting on the steam locomotive, he could truly feel the changes brought about by the steam engine. There was no need for animal power, just cheap coal, and this big guy made of steel with white steam coming out of it could carry people forward. The steam locomotive circled around the room and stopped. Michael sat on the locomotive for a while before getting off. He looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Mack, how is the endurance of your steam locomotive? How much weight can it carry at one time?" This is a miniaturized version of the steam locomotive. It is mainly used for demonstration and trial runs. If it is to be put into actual operation, the whole thing needs to be enlarged to increase the horsepower of the steam engine and increase the load capacity. A steam locomotive can carry more than 100 tons. The specific data can only be determined after the actual steam locomotive is built. The endurance depends on the amount of coal. As long as there is enough coal, the train can reach any place where the tracks are laid. Meg looked at Michael and said with a serious expression. Michael reached out and gently knocked on the train. After a moment of silence, he looked at Meg and said with a smile, "Make an appointment with the Hill. Let's talk about cooperation." Okay. A smile also appeared on Meg's face. The City Lord's castle was simpler than he thought. After the City Lord's castle agreed, Meg already had the right to choose the third-party partner. The blue suede was still brightly lit at this time. Mars quickly walked into the room. He looked at Gloria, who was holding a piece of silk and thinking about something, and said, "Young mistress, all 30 sets of gowns have been pre-ordered. Each gown costs 100,000 copper coins, and they will all be delivered before the end of the month. There are also many customers who have inquired about the other 2 gowns, but according to your request, they are not accepting pre-orders. Instead, they will be put on the market in half a month. The sales are expected to be good." "That's great. In that case, we can turn our losses into profits this month, right?" Gloria's eyes lit up. The tiredness from a busy day seemed to have disappeared. She was also a little excited. Mars nodded and said, "The president has cut off all ties with the previous losses. After deducting the wages of the tailors and the workers, just the 30 sets of gowns alone will be able to make a profit of 2 million copper coins. After the other 2 gowns are put on the market in half a month, the profit should be between 500,000 and 1 million copper coins." Gloria put down the piece of silk in her hand and said with a smile, "The president gave me a letter today. If our profits this month can surpass Cyril's blacksmith shop, I will be given a position as a director of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. At the same time, I will be given more opportunities to manage the family business. The blacksmith shop used to be a good business, but it hasn't been doing well in the past few years. It has been on the verge of losing money. Although it is better than the previous suede, it is basically impossible to surpass the current suede in less than 20 days. Mars was very confident. "We still can't let our guard down. Cyril will never give up so easily. Gloria shook her head. Chapter 686. In the northern part of the city, in a secluded courtyard, there were two sets of dim lights in a room. One of the black-robed men looked at Seuss with a grave expression, and said in a hushed voice, "Leader, we didn't receive any information about Snare and the others, nor were we able to find any leads. However, judging from what we found after returning to our stronghold, we've left behind many of our belongings and weapons, so Snare and the others most likely didn't leave Chaos City of their own accord. They must have encountered some mishap while searching for Alex, and were wiped out," another black-robed man said with a grim expression. "Could it be that they found Alex?" one of the black-robed men exclaimed before immediately covering his mouth with a hint of horror in his eyes. The atmosphere in the room instantly plunged to the freezing point. All of the black-robed men were silent, and they could see the horror in each other's eyes. Even though they had been targeting Alex for the past few years, the first thing they were struck by was not surprise, but horror instead. That legendary man had left behind an indelible record, and at the same time, he had left a deep shadow in the hearts of all of his opponents. There's no way that it was Alex. He's already crippled, so there's no way that he could wipe out Narson's entire team on his own. Seuss shook his head with certainty. His lips curled into a cold smile as he said, "However, no matter who it is, they must pay the price for killing a small team of our Black Eagles. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth." All of the black-robed men's expressions eased slightly upon hearing that, and confidence returned to their faces. Even though there's no way that Alex was the one who killed them, this doesn't necessarily mean that he has nothing to do with this. I'm going to deploy all of the Black Falcons to Chaos City and conduct a thorough search to track down Narson and the others, as well as to capture Alex. Seuss clenched his fists with a cold smile, and said, "I have a feeling that he's in Chaos City right now. It's not in his nature to go deep into the mountains." "Yes." All of the black-robed men replied in unison. After bidding farewell to the city lord and his daughter, Meg took Amy and Anna upstairs. He bribed Barbara with a black pepper steak, and asked her to give Anna a bath. After putting on a pretty pink nightgown, the two of them lay down on a little bed. Meow, Ugly Duckling was crying out from under the bed, and it was clinging to the foot of the bed as it poked its head out. Amy poked her head out from under the bed, and said, "Ugly Duckling, I already have Big Sister Anna. I don't want you anymore. You can sleep on the floor from now on." Meow, Ugly Duckling's ears immediately drooped, and it withdrew its front paws from the foot of the bed as tears welled up in its eyes. Ugly Duckling. Amy of the bed of her of course, and to her of the world, of the Black Falcons of the bed of chaos of the world of the world. Of the black of black to the bed of the black bed to it. Of Amy to Ugly Duckling immediately jumped up in excitement, and looked up at Amy with an expectant expression. "Seeing as Big Sister Anna has already agreed, then I'll reluctantly agree to let you sleep on the bed, but you have to be good." Amy nodded after a brief moment of contemplation. She lay down on the bed, picked up Ugly Duckling, and placed it between the two of them. Meow, Ugly Duckling found a comfortable position between the two of them before closing its eyes and falling asleep. "Good boy." Anna stroked Ugly Duckling's fur gently with a smile on her face. "But it's getting fatter and fatter. I feel like this bed is going to collapse under its weight soon." Amy sighed as she pinched Ugly Duckling's face. "It's even cuter when it's chubby. Look how fun it is to pinch it like this. It's like it's made out of water." Anna pinched Ugly Duckling's face with both hands, and gently pinched it into a round pancake, then a square. "Wow! I didn't know you could do that." Amy's eyes lit up, and she was instantly intrigued. She reached out to pinch Ugly Duckling's face to the sides, and it immediately changed its appearance, causing the two little fellows to burst into laughter. "How pitiful. Meg, who had just come out of the shower, couldn't help but shake his head with a smile upon seeing this scene. Other people's cats were all masters, but here, ugly duckling status in the family was automatically reduced by one no matter who it was. The two little fellows had a lot of fun, and Amy turned to Meg, and said coquettishly, "Father, can you tell us a bedtime story?" Anna also turned to Meg upon hearing that, and her eyes lit up with anticipation. In the past, Grandpa would tell her a bedtime story every night to coax her to sleep. "Alright, then let's tell you a story about Snow White today." Meg sat down on the bed with a stool. "Is Snow White made of ice cream?" Amy asked, raising her little hand. "No, Snow White is called Snow White because her skin is as white as snow." Meg shook his head with a smile. His daughter's brain was really wired like no one else's. "I see. What a pity." Amy nodded regretfully. Although he didn't know what Amy felt regretful about, Meg still began to tell the story of Snow White in a gentle and low voice. In the harsh winter, the snow was like goose feathers dancing in the sky. The queen sat by the window, looking at the white snow, and made a wish. Snow White's tragic life began with this beautiful wish. Because of her beauty, she was envied by the new queen, and was kidnapped into the forest. She met the 7 dwarves, but still couldn't escape from the queen's clutches. First, she was almost strangled to death, and then she was almost killed by a poisonous comb. Amy and Anna were completely immersed in Meg's story. They were worried about Snow White's life and death, and their anger toward the vicious queen fluctuated along with the story. However, when he reached the part where Snow White ate a poisonous apple and died as if she was in a deep sleep, Meg stopped. As a father, he really couldn't tell them the original story. A necrophiliac prince fell in love with Snow White's corpse, spent money to buy her corpse, and ended up with her in the end. This was not in line with his worldview. "Father, what happened after that? Did Snow White really die?" Amy looked at Meg sadly. Anna's eyes were also filled with tears. This Snow White was as pitiful as she was. Chapter 687. A gratified smile appeared on Meg's face at the sight of the 2 little girls falling asleep with smiles on their faces. Self-reliance was the right way to start a fairy tale. Stories like abandoning one's brain and relying on one's Prince Charming weren't suitable for little girls at all. He tiptoed back onto his bed and rested as he thought back to everything that had happened today. The city lord's castle had more or less made a decision, but Buffett still had to wait for the Hill's opinion. Whether the 3 parties would be able to enter into a substantive discussion or not would still be up to the Hill to decide. After that, Meg looked at the 0.5 strength point pouch in his body. This was the reward that the system had given him for completing the system mission today. Even though it wasn't much, it was undoubtedly a timely addition to Meg's current situation. The journey to Rodu was going to be fraught with dangers, and the more powerful he was, the greater his chances of survival would be. Meg lay on his bed for a long while before looking at the clock. It was already midnight, and only then did he silently crawl out of his bed and make his way to the balcony. System, activate the soundproofing effects of the room, then activate the 0.5 strength point, Meg said internally as he made his way to the balcony. The memory of being struck by lightning last time was still fresh in his mind, and no one wanted to experience something like that again. However, he had to make the lightning strike even more ferociously, and this feeling of exasperation made him feel a little resigned. The soundproofing effects of the restaurant have been fully activated. Prepare to be struck by lightning. Please close your eyes. The system's voice sounded with a hint of glee and schadenfreude in its voice. Meg pursed his lips and refrained from saying anything. He stood at the center of the balcony and waited for the lightning to strike. There was probably nothing more torturous in this world than waiting to be struck by lightning. Hence, when a bolt of lightning as thick as a water bucket fell from the sky and landed on Mag, he even felt a sense of release as a clap of thunder exploded beside his ears. Phew! After an indeterminate period of time, Meg heaved a long sigh of relief and stretched his completely stiff body. Lightning swam over the surface of his body, making crackling sounds as if he had just been fished out of a thunderstorm. Fortunately, I took off all my clothes. Otherwise, another set would have been ruined. Meg lowered his head and looked at his charred body. Even his shorts had turned into ashes when he moved slightly. A gust of autumn wind blew, causing him to shiver. He quickly put on a bathrobe and went downstairs. While taking a shower, Meg felt the changes in his body after the lightning strike. Meg felt that even if he were to face an ironhide bull now, he would be able to beat it to the ground with a single punch. This was not an arrogant thought, but a judgment of the physical fitness of a level 4 knight. If a normal 4th-tier knight were to face off against an ironhide bull, perhaps they would be able to capture it with their exceptional swordsmanship and other abilities. However, if this knight specialized in body refinement, then his powerful physical constitution would allow him to clash head-on with the ironhide bull. Alex was someone who could fight against a giant dragon back then, so his physical fitness was naturally incomparably strong. Before I go to Rodu, I have to master my swordsmanship to the pinnacle of the 4th tier. Meg slowly clenched his fists as he made up his mind. Within a lavish and intricate room in the Moraton Manor, a warm light illuminated a corner of the room. Hill was sitting by the window, holding a crystal glass that was half filled with wine. His brows were furrowed as he pondered something. The room was silent for a long while. Hill looked at the wine glass in his hand before suddenly raising it and downing it in one gulp. It was as if he had made up his mind, and a smile appeared on his face as he said, "In the past, I've always prioritized stability in all of my investments. However, perhaps I should take a gamble this time. If I succeed, then the Buffett family will become one of the most powerful families on the Norland continent. Aside from the bank and winery, the Buffett family will also have a steam locomotive that is just as renowned as the Buffett family. That will be an honor for me. Mr. Meg, I hope you don't disappoint me." Hill put down his wine glass and snuffed out the light. In a hotel room in the northern part of the city, Snare, who had disguised himself as a burly man with a full beard, was carefully examining a map under the light. There were already a few places on the map that had been circled with red lines, making it appear rather messy. It's not easy to find someone in Chaos City who's intentionally hiding themselves, and there's no one I can trust. Hopefully, I'll be lucky this time and find the young mistress and Master Alex as soon as possible. Snare heaved a faint sigh as he sat at the table. He quickly wrote a letter before placing it into a small bamboo tube. After that, he silently opened the window and blew a thin whistle. A white hummingbird that was only around the size of 2 fingers flew into his hand. He tied the small bamboo tube to the hummingbird's leg, and tossed it out the window before disappearing into the night sky in the blink of an eye. In the second prince's manor in Rodu. "Your Highness, this is a letter from Ambassador Carols." The butler quickly strode into the study with a letter in his hand. He made his way over to the desk in a respectful manner before presenting the letter to Joshua. "Carols." Josh's brows furrowed as the letter in his hand transformed into a ball of dark green light. He accepted the letter from the butler and began to read it. "Meg? Is this a coincidence, or is there a connection between them?" Josh's brows furrowed even more tightly after reading half of the letter. He continued to read on before shaking his head again. "No, Alex isn't someone who can cook well. Even if he's a cripple now, there's no way he'd become a chef. He's a proud man, and even if he were to die, there's no way he'd lower his head to anyone or cook for anyone. There's no way he'd become a good chef." The butler stood off to the side in silence, not daring to utter a single sound. After reading Carol's letter, Josh fell silent for a moment before picking up a pen and paper to write a reply. K-Rolls had been an ambassador in Chaos City for over 10 years, and that was more than enough for him to receive a decent official title upon his return to Rodu. All he had to do was use his connections to secure him a position of authority, and that wasn't a difficult task for him. As for K-Roll's request for the best chef in Chaos City to cook for the king on his birthday, Josh was quite intrigued by it. He had been quite troubled recently about what kind of birthday present the king would like. There were countless precious treasures in the royal palace, and the king couldn't afford a beautiful woman. If this chef really was as good as K-Rolls claimed, then it would be worth a try. Seuss is in a difficult situation in Chaos City, so I'll have K-Rolls use his connections in Chaos City one last time before he leaves. Josh put down his pen and folded the letter before handing it to the butler beside him. "Mr. Mag, I wonder if you've thought it through." Chapter 688. Meg opened the door, and was greeted by the sight of a slightly portly middle-aged butler standing at the entrance of the restaurant. A perplexed look appeared on his face as he asked, "Who are you?" The man smiled, and replied, "I am Master K-Roll's butler, Holton. I am here on behalf of Master K-Rolls to ask if you've decided to travel to Rodu with him in 14 days to cook for His Majesty's birthday banquet." Meg nodded with a slightly apologetic expression as he said, "I see. Please tell Master K-Rolls that I haven't discussed this matter with my child yet, so I'll have to wait a few more days before I can give him a reply. Master K-Rolls has said that if you're willing to travel to Rodu with him, you can also travel with him. You'll be taking flying magic beasts to Rodu, and it'll only take you a day to get there," Holton said as he looked at Meg. Meg nodded, and replied, "I'll consider it. Thank you for your kind offer, Master K-Rolls." Before the matter of the steam engine was settled, he couldn't give K-Rolls an accurate answer. Otherwise, it would be quite boring if he wasn't recognized in Rodu, only to be locked up as a royal chef in the royal palace. That wouldn't be in line with Meg's plans. "All right, I'll relay Mr. Mag's message to my master. However, going to Rodu is an extremely rare opportunity, so I hope you'll consider it carefully." Q-Tan nodded, and didn't say anything else as he rode away on his horse. "Rewards come with risks, I have to make this trip to Rodu." Meg looked on at Holton's departing figure with a grim expression. After breakfast, Amy went to class, while Anna continued to practice her knife skills with Meg in the kitchen. Her perseverance and determination came as quite a surprise to Meg. Of course, he was also quite pleased to see her like this. Which master wouldn't want their disciples to be more hardworking? Even though Anna was quite young, she was far more hardworking than the average person. After lunch, Meg was just about to close the restaurant for a rest when Dykes and Hill appeared at the entrance of the restaurant. "Mr. Meg, would you be free for a chat?" Hill asked with a smile at the sight of the slightly surprised Meg. Meg was indeed a little surprised, but he quickly recovered. Hill certainly wasn't going to follow his plan, so he nodded with a smile, and said, "Miss Hill and Master Dykes are both here, so of course I'm free. Please come in." Sally and Barbara had taken Anna to help Yabamiya, so there was no one else in the restaurant. Meg came out with 2 glasses of water and placed them in front of Hill and Dykes before taking a seat as well. Hill took a sip of water before smiling at Meg, and said, "Please don't misunderstand, Mr. Meg. I went to the City Lord's castle this morning to confirm whether the City Lord's castle is willing to participate in your plan. However, it seems like my worries were unfounded. The City Lord is very supportive of your plan, so he asked Master Dykes to come with me to discuss the details of the cooperation with you. This is no small matter, so it's only right that Ms. Hill is being cautious." Meg nodded with a smile. He was already quite surprised that Hill was willing to cooperate with him in just one night. After all, steam engines and trains were completely new to this world. They hadn't been tested in the market, so the risks were uncontrollable, and the investment was extremely high. Dacus put a thick file on the table, and smiled at Meg as he said, "The City Lord is very appreciative of Mr. Meg's creativity, and is willing to cooperate fully with Mr. Meg's production and marketing plan. Since all three parties have made their intentions clear, let's not beat around the bush and get straight to the point." Meg looked at the two of them with a serious expression, and said, "I can provide all the technology and processes for steam engines and steam locomotives, and I will continue to do research in this area and upgrade the steam engines. My request is that I get 10% of the profits from the entire system." Hill thought for a while before looking at Meg and said, "Since Mr. Meg is so open, I won't play the game of beating around the bush. Buffett Banks can provide all the funds and resources of the Norland continent for this plan, but my request is that you get the exclusive right to operate the steam locomotives, and no less than 60% of the profits from the entire system. The development and operation of the steam engines will be separated from this plan. I hope it will be a bilateral cooperation between Buffett Banks and Mr. Meg. Mr. Meg will get 20% of the profits related to this plan. He is indeed an impressive businessman." Meg couldn't help but praise him in his heart, but his expression remained calm. The characteristics of the steam locomotives required a force like Chaos City's involvement to promote them faster, but the promotion and development of the steam engines was purely a commercial activity. Although Hill gave Meg 10% of the profits, he also got full autonomy. The City Lord's castle can accept 30% of the profits from the steam locomotives, and the City Lord's castle will let the Bureau of Machinery fully cooperate with the manufacturing and provide all kinds of talents. They will also be responsible for building relationships with the various races so that the steam locomotives can be promoted smoothly. However, apart from 30% of the profits, the City Lord's castle has another request. Once we enter an emergency period, Chaos City will have the right to temporarily take over the railway, and the other two parties will have to give their full support." Dacus looked at the two of them, and continued, "As for the steam engines, I don't have the right to make a decision. I have to report this to the City Lord first before I can give a reply. During an emergency period, the Buffett family will stand by Chaos City unconditionally, and will definitely cooperate with the City Lord's castle." Hill nodded. He had no objections. Meg nodded slightly. Michael should have given Dacus a region, and Hill's conditions were acceptable to the City Lord's castle. He smiled, and said, "In this case, the three parties have reached a basic agreement regarding the steam locomotives. We can discuss the steam engines later. We can finalize the steam locomotives today." Hill nodded slightly, and said, "I can sign the contract on behalf of Buffett Banks. As long as Mr. Meg and the City Lord's castle agree to my conditions, we can draft the contract today. However, I suggest we find someone more professional to decide on the specifics." Dacus shook his head, and said, "That's the City Lord's castle's condition. However, I think we need to discuss the specifics of the contract in detail before we can make a decision. Also, the City Lord will personally sign it. The City Lord's castle and young Mistress Hill are clearly more professional in this matter, so I'll have to trouble both of you to draft the contract. I won't participate in the operation and management. I will only provide the technology and receive remuneration. If possible, I hope you can keep my cooperation confidential." Meg looked at the two of them with a smile. Chapter 689. In the magic room on the second floor of the magic potion shop, Julian looked at Amy, who was making a snowman. He coughed lightly, and said in a hoarse voice, "Little Amy, after this period of practice, you've become more proficient in the use of illusion magic. What we're going to do next is to endow the item with magical energy. Only then will it be able to exert its combat power in battle. Just like Master Julian's frost dragon that can spit out ice cubes." Amy's interest was immediately piqued. Julian nodded, and said, "That's right. If an illusion is just a form, then it's nothing more than a trick to deceive people. If a magician's illusion can't make the item they create possess the characteristics and abilities of an illusion item, then it's a failure. Just like the fire phoenix that Crassus created, it's just a fighting rooster with the appearance of a fire phoenix. But Master Crassus's fighting rooster and Master Julian's frost dragon fought for a long time without a clear victor. Amy looked at Julian with a puzzled expression. Well. Julian's expression stiffened, and he didn't know how to respond for a moment. He coughed dryly, and continued, Now, let's start with endow the ability. First, choose an item that you think is the most powerful, and create its appearance. Then, think about its abilities in your mind, and think about how to make the item you create possess the same abilities. Also, I'll remind you one last time, you're not allowed to transform into Mr. Mac. Julian reminded her again. During this period of time, he hated seeing Meg the most. He felt like he was a transfer student who would appear in front of him almost every day. I still think Father is the most powerful. Amy murmured softly. However, when she saw Julian's expression, she hesitated for a moment, and fell into deep thought. Julian watched from the side. He wasn't in a hurry to teach Amy the method, nor did he give her any hints or suggestions. He had never seen anyone who was as talented as Amy in magic. Even Irina, who had amazed him in the past, was still a far cry from Amy. As for himself, he admitted that even if he had another brain, he was still not as talented as Amy. Therefore, he was more willing to give Amy directions and let her walk on her own. This was something that Crassus and he had a rare tacit understanding. To them, level 10 was already an insurmountable limit. Even though they were indeed much more powerful than ordinary level 10 great magicians, they were well aware that they were still within the realm of level 10. Therefore, they wanted to know if there was really someone in this world who could break through the shackles of level 10 and break through to level 11. Some people said that the Elven Queen was at level 11. However, even during the racial war, the Elven Queen had only fought a few times. No one knew how powerful she was, or if she was just a smokescreen released by the elves to raise their status on the continent. Julian and Crassus accepted Amy as their disciple at the same time not only because they cherished her talent, but also because they had a tacit understanding. They both wanted to see if there was really a level above that. Amy closed her eyes. A ball of golden-orange light appeared above her head. It slowly gathered and then expanded. It looked quite magical. This is... Julian's eyes lit up. He looked at the scene with some anticipation. Successful ability bestowment was one of the hallmarks of a level 5 magician. Amy had only been learning magic for a little more than a month. From a complete novice to a level 4 magician, her speed of improvement was unprecedented. If she succeeded in ability bestowment, she would once again set a new record for the youngest level 5 magician. This might be something that would never be repeated in the future. The golden-orange light made Julian think of many magical beasts. Of course, this included the golden dragon. However, this was Amy's first attempt at ability bestowment. Even if the magical beasts were of a lower level, it was still a groundbreaking feat. The golden-orange light wriggled slowly. Then, it slowly shrank and became more solid. This is that orange cat. About 10 minutes later, Julian stared at the little orange cat that had appeared above Amy's head. His lips twitched, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Wow, it really is exactly the same. Amy also opened her eyes. She looked up at the little orange cat floating in the air and nodded with satisfaction. Little Amy, I meant for you to conjure up something that you think is the most powerful. Usually, it's some kind of powerful magical beast. Only then will it be able to unleash its full power in battle. You little cat. Although Julian had always followed the teaching philosophy of letting Amy unleash her true nature, he still couldn't remain calm at the sight of that adorable little orange cat. If he were to toss out an orange cat in battle, the best outcome would be to make the opponent laugh themselves to death. Master, this isn't a cat. It's Ugly Duckling. Amy emphasized seriously. Then, she pointed at Ugly Duckling and said, also, Ugly Duckling is really powerful. Julian still couldn't believe it. He looked at the orange cat and said, then, have you given it any ability? Try unleashing it on me. Duong. The entire building shook as a result. A huge cat-shaped meatball fell from the sky and pinned Julian underneath. Amy looked at Julian, whose upper body was exposed, and asked with concern, Master, are you all right? Julian's face was a little red, and he said with difficulty, I'm fine. But, move this ball away from me first. The city lord's castle and the hill were extremely efficient. Chapter 690. 3 days later, at Mamie's. Meg looked at Carols with a smile, and said, Ambassador Carols, I agree to go to Rodu with you to cook for the King of the Roth Empire on his birthday. I'm sure it'll be very interesting to cook alongside chefs from all over the Norland continent. As expected, you didn't disappoint me, Mr. Meg. I'm sure His Highness will be very pleased with your cooking. As long as you can satisfy His Majesty, you'll definitely become a very popular figure in Rodu. It won't be difficult for you to open a restaurant that's even larger than Dukas' restaurant in Rodu. Carols had prepared a plethora of words to persuade Meg, but he didn't even have to say a single one. However, this was undoubtedly very good news for him. Even though I'm willing to go to Rodu, there are a few things that I want to make clear with you, Ambassador Carols. I'm going to Rodu with the intention of learning, but I can only stay in Rodu for 5 days at most. The customers of Mamie's are still waiting for me to cook for them. I won't be staying in Rodu, nor will I be staying in the royal palace. Amy still has to study magic from the 2 great magic casters in Chaos City, so I have to return to Chaos City. Also, even though Mamie's is a small restaurant, its net profit is still around 500,000 copper coins per day. Once I leave, the restaurant will have to close down. Seeing as His Highness is inviting me to Rodu, then my salary for the next 5 days will be. Meg looked at Carols with a smile, but his words suddenly trailed off. Carols faltered momentarily before replying with a smile, You don't have to worry about the remuneration, Mr. Mag. His Highness will definitely pay you 500,000 copper coins per day, and I'm sure you won't be shortchanged. However, Mr. Meg, perhaps you've never left Chaos City before. Rodu is not inferior to Chaos City in the slightest. Furthermore, all of the wealthy people of the Roth Empire gather in Rodu, and the scale and development of the restaurant industry far exceeds that of Chaos City. Are you sure you don't want to consider going to Rodu? Furthermore, as long as he could become a favorite of the second prince and His Majesty, it would not be impossible for him to receive a noble title. That was something that was impossible to achieve in Chaos City. Your daughter is currently learning magic from 2 great magic casters, but if she goes to Rodu, she'll be able to enter the Magus Tower with just a single word from the second prince. That's the legendary Holy Land for magic casters. That would be an incredible honor. Carols looked at Mag with a hint of excitement in his eyes. Sorry, I always like to believe in what I already have. Meg smiled and shook his head. Carols took a meaningful look at Meg, and upon seeing that he had no intention of changing his mind, he rose to his feet and said, All right, then I won't force you, Mr. Meg. We'll set off for Rodu in 9 days, and I hope you'll be able to make the necessary preparations, Mr. Meg. All right. Meg nodded as he looked on as Carols departed. In the suede textile shop, all of the tailors were busy, and all of the employees were busy assisting the tailors. Not a single one of them had the time to rest. The empty storefront had been transformed into a small garment factory. More than 20 tailors were busy making clothes with their apprentices and assistants. These tailors weren't very renowned in Chaos City, but all of them had solid craftsmanship skills. It was already very good for them to receive 3 or 4 custom-made garments in a month, but that was barely enough to make a living. As such, when the suede textiles shop offered them twice the usual price for each piece of clothing, almost no one could refuse such an offer. As long as they were diligent enough, their wages would be several times higher than normal, and all of them were extremely motivated. During these past few days, Gloria had spent almost all of her time in the shop, inspecting the quality and details of each and every piece of clothing. She wanted to ensure that all of the garments were of the highest quality and worth their price. Gloria made her way over to a female tailor who was busy embroidering patterns with her head lowered, and praised, "Rebecca, your embroidery skills are really good. You'll be responsible for all of the collar embroidery for this batch of clothing." Rebecca hurriedly rose to her feet upon hearing that, and waved her hands in a slightly panicked manner as she said, "Young mistress, I'm just an ordinary tailor. How can you entrust such an important task to me? I'm already very grateful to be able to work here." She had heeded Meg's advice to apply for a job at this shop. She had initially only wanted to give it a try, but she didn't think that she would actually be hired. The monthly salary that she was receiving was much higher than what she was receiving from other jobs, and it was enough for her to support herself and Jessica without having to rely on the city lord's castle subsidies. Rebecca knew that Mr. Meg and young Mistress Gloria were definitely acquainted with one another, but she didn't slack off because of that. Instead, she worked even harder to complete her job. However, now that Gloria was going to let her embroider the collars of the garments, which were said to sell for hundreds of thousands of copper coins each, how could she possibly be worthy of such a position? Gloria shook her head with a smile, and said, "You're more than qualified for this job. I hope that every customer will receive the most perfect clothing, so I can't do without you." Jessica looked at Gloria, and tears were already welling up in her eyes. Once upon a time, living was already a luxury to her, let alone hearing praise from others. This feeling of being recognized and respected was something that she hadn't felt in a long time. Gloria smiled, and asked, "By the way, I heard that you have a daughter who sometimes plays outside the shop, right? Because the child is still young, and I'm the only one taking care of her, I asked her to come to the door during lunch and share half of my food with her. If young mistress doesn't like it, I'll tell her not to come again." Jessica's expression suddenly became a little nervous, and she hurriedly said. Gloria shook her head, and said, "Of course not. What I want to say is that if the child is willing, you can bring her to work and let her play in the shop. It's fine as long as she doesn't disturb the master's work. I'll have them prepare an extra portion of food, so you don't have to share half of it with the child." Rebecca looked at Gloria in disbelief. A few days ago, Teacher Luna proposed to establish the first batch of funds for the foundation, and it won't be long before your child can go to school. But before that, let her accompany you in the shop. That way, you'll feel more at ease. Gloria continued. Thank you. Rebecca stood up and bowed deeply to Gloria. "Then, I'll leave the embroidery of this batch of garments to you." Gloria returned the bow with a smile. "Uncle Meg, will Uncle Blower be able to come back?" Chapter 691. Meg stood beside Anna, and also looked out the window. It had begun to drizzle outside, and the pattering of the rain was silent, but there was not a single person on the streets. Perhaps he won't be able to come back. After all, he set up a death flag before he left, and I've added another one. Meg thought to himself. He looked down at Anna, who was wearing a concerned expression, and feigned a nonchalant smile as he said, "It's all right." Perhaps he was delayed by something important on his way back. Even if he doesn't come back today, he'll be back in a few days. Really? Anna looked up into Meg's eyes, trying to find an answer. Really? Meg nodded in a firm manner. In reality, he didn't really believe this, either. Blower didn't seem to be very reliable, but from what he had said that day, Mag could deduce that what he was going to do this time was most likely not going to be a simple task. Then I'll wait for him for a while longer. Anna withdrew her gaze and looked out again. All right. Meg nodded and also stood by the window. He had met many people after coming to this world. Even though they weren't close friends, Mag still couldn't harden his heart. His mindset had changed a lot after all. The rain gradually became heavier, and the raindrops fell onto the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a curtain of water that obscured the view. There was no sound of knocking on the door. Go to sleep first. He'll be back for sure. Meg looked at the clock on the wall to find that it was already midnight. He heaved an internal sigh as he patted Anna's head gently. Ding! The sound of a bell sounded from outside the door. It's Uncle Blower. Anna's eyes lit up as she rushed to the door and pushed the door open. The rain was swept in by the wind, drenching Anna's entire body. The bell hanging on the door jingled in the wind and rain, but there was no one in the dark rainy night. Anna stood at the door with tears and rainwater flowing down her cheeks as she stood there in a daze. He'll be back. Meg closed the door gently and carried Anna upstairs. Meg changed Anna into a set of dry clothes, dried her hair, and gently placed her on the bed. Amy and Ugly Duckling were already sound asleep. Go to sleep. Perhaps he'll be back tomorrow morning, Meg said in a gentle voice as he tucked Anna under the thin blanket. Uncle Meg, am I a cursed elf? All those who are close to me have bad endings, Anna asked as she looked at Meg with tears in her eyes. Of course not. Anna is a good girl, not some cursed elf. Meg shook his head with a smile as he looked at Anna. Thank you, Uncle Mag, Anna said softly as she looked at Mag. She then turned around slowly with her back facing him. Mag stood beside the bed for a while as he looked at Anna with a sympathetic expression. What kind of things must she have gone through for her to have such thoughts? The wind forest, under the tree of life. Phyllis ran into the cave, and panted as she looked at Irina, who was planting flowers under the tree, and said, Your Highness, there hasn't been any news since the deal was cancelled 3 days ago. Perhaps it's because you scared those people, but, Irina put aside the small watering can in her hand, and looked at the 2 vibrant flowers in the soil. She nodded with satisfaction before looking up at Phyllis with furrowed brows, and said, Bean Sprout, speak properly. But what? But. I heard that they want you to represent the elven race at the birthday banquet of the King of the Roth Empire in 10 days. Phyllis finally said it out loud. Really? Irina was a little surprised. Phyllis hurriedly nodded, and said, It's already spread in the elven race. It said that Mistress Helena proposed it to the Queen, so it should have been decided. Irina's brows furrowed, and a thoughtful look appeared on her face. What is that old witch Helena up to again? She must be up to no good. Yes, I also think there must be a conspiracy. You have to be careful, Your Highness. Phyllis nodded in agreement. Could it be that this old witch knows that she can't represent the elven race with her looks, so she wants me to go to Rodu? Irina's expression became even more serious. Your thoughts are always so strange, Your Highness. Phyllis covered her face with her hand. She felt that her princess's brain was wired differently from that of normal people. It just so happens that I also want to make a trip to Rodu. It's time for me to settle some scores with those bastards from back then. A cold smile appeared on Irina's face as she said, Bean Sprout, keep an eye on this place. Let me know if anything happens. Yes, Your Highness. Phyllis nodded vigorously. Within a cave filled with stars, Heidi was wearing a black robe, and she was looking at Helena with a perplexed expression as she asked, Mistress Helena, why do you want Irina to go to Rodu as the elven race's representative? There hasn't been any news of her in the past few years, and many of our elven race have already speculated that Her Majesty is displeased with her. If she goes to Rodu as the elven race's representative to celebrate the king's birthday, wouldn't those rumors be dispelled? Wouldn't that be very detrimental to us? Hasn't she always wanted to go to Rodu? I'll fulfill her wish. Helena stood on the platform and looked down at Heidi, who was like a black mouse, as she said, "Those people aren't rats like you. They're not that easy to kill. If you push them too far, they'll bite." On the 7th day, there was no news of Blower. On the 8th day, there was no news of Blower. On the 14th day, there was no news of Blower. During this period of time, Anna had already stopped asking Meg about Blower. Instead, she would sit at the entrance of the restaurant for half an hour every day, as if she were waiting for something. Chapter 692. Early in the morning, a horse-drawn carriage departed from Amy's and headed toward the northern part of the city. Amy held Ugly Duckling in her arms as she turned to Meg with excitement in her eyes, and asked, "Father, are we really going to Rhoda today? That mega city that Teacher Luna mentioned is inhabited only by humans. And there's a lot of delicious food there." Meg nodded with a smile, and replied, "That's right. That's a big city, and it's mostly populated by humans. But if you want to eat good food, I can cook for you, Amy. I promise it'll be better than the food outside. But I want to eat super delicious food. Can Father cook for me? How about we go to Rodu? I'll treat Father to some delicious food, and Father can cook for me after we get to eat good food," Amy said with a conflicted expression. "Does Amy still have a secret stash of money?" Meg looked at Amy with a smile. "Didn't she give all of her secret stash to Luna a few days ago?" "That's right. I still have a copper coin. I picked it up when I came back with Teacher Crassus yesterday. Crassus didn't want half of it, so he gave it all to me." Amy opened her little hand, and there was a shimmering copper coin in her hand. Meow! Ugly Duckling made its way over and licked Amy's little hand with its little tongue as it looked at Amy with a fawning expression. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with a determined expression, and said, "Don't even think about it, Ugly Duckling. You're not allowed to eat supper or meat in the future. If you continue to get fat like this, the carriage is going to collapse under your weight." Meow! Ugly Duckling lowered its head with an aggrieved expression. "Did Teacher Crassus say anything when you went to class yesterday?" Meg asked with a smile. "He praised me. He said that I'm comparable to him back in the day." Amy nodded before hesitantly saying, "But I feel like he was belittling me." "You didn't say that to Teacher Crassus, did you?" Meg couldn't help but chuckle. "I didn't tell him." Amy shook her head and muttered, "But when I was muttering, he heard me. Then his old injury acted up and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He's lucky that he didn't die from anger." Meg smiled and shook his head. As his daughter's teacher, he had to have a better attitude. Amy's eyes suddenly lit up, and she said, "By the way, Teacher Crassus also said that he's going to Rhoda tomorrow, and he invited me to go with him, but I refused." "Crassus is also going to Rhoda?" Meg was a little surprised to hear this. "That's right. Teacher Crassus must have been worried that I would fall behind in my homework, so he followed me to Rhoda. Teacher Julian is the best, he never even gives me homework. Come to think of it, Teacher Crassus will be teaching the next few days, and every time he takes a leave of absence, he's always a little unlucky." Meg shook his head with a smile. If Crassus was also going to Rhoda, then their trip would be much safer. With how much Crassus doted on Amy, there was no way that he would allow Amy to fall into danger. As such, he would be able to do some things without holding back. The horse-drawn carriage traveled for close to an hour before stopping at the northern city gate. Meg carried Amy out of the horse-drawn carriage, and the coachman and 2 servants came forward to pick up the luggage in the carriage. "Wow, father, look! There's a huge bird over there." Before Meg had a chance to find the bird, Amy was already pointing to the left with an excited expression. Meg turned to find a huge black bird with a wingspan of over 30 meters lying on the ground beside the city wall. Even though it was lying on its stomach, it was still around 3 to 4 meters tall, making it look like an airplane. The bird resembled an eagle, but it wasn't as sharp and unruly as an eagle. Its massive head seemed to have been sliced in half, and there was only a flat surface above its head. Its blue eyes appeared to be quite docile, and it was currently eating fist-sized beans with its head lowered. Aside from its head, everything else was completely still. This was a common flying steed on the Norland continent, the flat-headed falcon. It wasn't very fast among flying steeds, but it was renowned for its docility and ability to carry heavy loads. It was a must-have choice for wealthy families on long-distance trips. Meg was no stranger to this bird, but he was still quite stunned to see it in person. There were many seats and boxes fixed to the bird's back and wings. A long ladder had been set up on the bird's back, and workers were climbing onto the bird's back with boxes and luggage. Carols was standing beside the bird, and he was conversing with 2 officials who appeared to be from the city lord's castle with smiles on their faces. He raised a hand to signal to Meg and the others before continuing with their conversation. Meanwhile, his son, Elijah, was standing beside him with a gloomy expression. He faltered slightly at the sight of Meg, and a hint of rage immediately appeared in his eyes as he clenched his fists tightly. Meg took note of Elijah's actions. He didn't have much of an impression of this ambassador's son, and he didn't know when he had incurred his father's wrath. However, he didn't take this matter to heart. He had seen many young masters like him in his past life, all of whom bullied the weak and feared the strong. Meg was just about to walk toward the bird with Amy in his arms when a horse-drawn carriage stopped beside Meg. The curtains of the carriage were lifted, and a young woman in a gray linen dress emerged from within. "Miss Luna. Teacher Luna. Mr. Meg, Amy." All 3 of them greeted in unison. Meg turned to Luna with a hint of surprise on his face, while Amy was elated. Luna disembarked from the horse-drawn carriage, and explained with a sincere expression, "I heard that Mr. Meg will be traveling to Rodu with Ambassador Carols, so I'd like to request a ride with you. The debate over the decimal system has reached a critical juncture, so please make some time to meet my grandfather after you arrive at Rodu." Meg looked into Luna's sincere eyes, and nodded with a smile as he said, "Then I'll have to trouble you to introduce me to him, Miss Luna." "Thank you." A smile appeared on Luna's face. "That's great. Teacher Luna will be coming to Rodu with us as well." Amy got down from Meg's arms and held on to Ugly Duckling with one hand, while holding onto Luna's hand with the other with an elated smile on her little face. The 2 officials from the city lord's castle concluded their conversation and made their way toward the city gate before stopping beside Meg. One of them was Dicus, and he extended a hand toward Meg with a smile as he said, "Mr. Meg, I wish you a pleasant trip." "Thank you." Meg also shook Dicus' hand with a smile on his face. "Mr. Meg, Miss Luna." Carols nodded at Meg and Luna, and then turned to Meg with a smile as he said, "Mr. Meg, you really are a talent. Even City Lord Michael told me to take you back to Chaos City in 5 days. Thank you for your kindness, City Lord." Meg smiled in response, but didn't offer any further explanation. Carols glanced at his watch, and also didn't ask any questions. He nodded, and said, "It's getting late, let's get ready to set off." "All right." Meg carried Amy and climbed onto the bird's back with Luna, and they were arranged to sit in the front row near the bird's head. "Ugly Duckling, we haven't even taken off yet, why are you trembling?" Amy sat down beside Meg, and looked at Ugly Duckling with a disdainful expression as she said, "You'll never become a swan like this. Let's get ready to set off, Elijah." Family Moriton hasn't explicitly refused yet, so I'll contact them again after I return to Rodu. As a man, you have to be patient in order to achieve great things. Kairals patted Elijah's shoulder before climbing onto the giant bird. Elijah's eyes lit up again, and he also climbed onto the bird's back. Take off. Our destination is Rodu, Kairals announced after everyone had boarded the bird's back. Chapter 693. A hemispherical magic barrier rose up, enshrouding all of the people and goods on the bird's back. The giant bird flapped its wings and continued to rise higher and higher. In the blink of an eye, the buildings on the ground had been reduced to small boxes, giving them a panoramic view of the entire Chaos City. Wow! It's so fun to fly. Father, look! That's the Aiden Square, and our restaurant is in the corner. It looks like a small box from here. Amy exclaimed excitedly. She lowered her head and looked down without a hint of fear. Father, look! That's the Aiden Square. However, Ugly Duckling wasn't as calm as it was in her arms. It hugged its eyes with its hands, and plunged its butt into Amy's arms as it trembled uncontrollably. However, this was the first time that Mag had experienced flying on a large bird's back, so he was naturally not afraid of flying. As such, he was naturally quite excited, and he didn't try to hide his excitement in the slightest. The speed of this giant bird naturally couldn't compare with that of a plane, but flying in the air was naturally much faster than traveling on land. According to Kairals, they should be able to reach Rodu by nightfall. Meg took a moment to glance at Luna, only to find that she was also quite calm and collected. It appeared that this wasn't her first time riding on a flying steed, so she really was quite an extraordinary figure. Country bumpkins. Elijah took a glance at Mag and Amy, and pursed his lips with disdain. He was just sitting on the most ordinary flying magic beast, yet he was already so excited. Why was his father holding him in such high regard? It was truly perplexing. Elijah's gaze then fell on Luna, and he surreptitiously appraised her as he nodded to himself. This young Mistress Luna is quite beautiful. Compared to those mediocre women, her intellectual temperament is quite captivating. If that Gloria doesn't agree, then I can consider asking Father to propose marriage to her family. Meg noticed all of Elijah's little movements, but he wasn't too worried about Luna. According to Kairal's attitude towards Luna, her family's strength and reputation should be above Kairal's. If Elijah wanted to do anything, he would have to consider his own status. Ugly Duckling, you can't be like this. As a duck, how can you be afraid of heights? Chaos City gradually disappeared from sight. Amy withdrew her gaze, and looked down at the trembling Ugly Duckling in her arms. Ugly Duckling was still covering its eyes, and it didn't utter a single sound as it buried its head even deeper into the ground. If you can't fly, then you don't deserve to be called a white swan. If you're not a white swan, then I won't be able to eat roast goose. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression. So, I'm going to start training you to adapt to the sky now. Meg looked at Amy with an intrigued expression. He wanted to see how she was going to train Ugly Duckling to develop its fear of heights. After all, this wasn't something that could be easily avoided. Luna was also looking on from the side with a curious expression. Amy's mischievous nature often left her at a loss for words, but her little ideas were also very interesting. Ugly Duckling hadn't uttered a single sound this entire time, but that didn't affect Amy's concern for it in the slightest. She reached out to pry open Ugly Duckling's front paws, and looked at it with a smile as she said, "Ugly Duckling, we're now very, very high up in the sky. There are white clouds all around us, and the things on the ground seem to have shrunk down. They're flying high and fast, high and fast, high and fast, high and fast." Meow, Ugly Duckling trembled even more violently. Even though its eyes were closed, it felt as if it could already see everything down below from Amy's description, and it was struck by a sense of horror. Now, listen to my instructions and slowly open your eyes. Actually, as long as you can see with your own eyes, everything won't be so scary anymore. Come on, slowly open your eyes, slowly. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling, whose eyes were still tightly shut this entire time, and picked it up by the scruff of its neck. Her voice immediately became a little cold as she said, "If you still don't open your eyes, I'm going to throw you down." Meow. Ugly Duckling opened its eyes almost immediately, and looked down with wide eyes. Its legs spasmed a few times, and its eyes rolled back into its head as it fainted. Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling. Ugly. It's still alive. That's good, it really is a rare coward. Amy pinched Ugly Duckling's cheeks in exasperation before placing it back onto her lap with a resigned expression. Amy, don't force people to do things they don't want to do. This is basic courtesy, Luna said to Amy with a smile. All right, Teacher Luna. Amy nodded obediently. She looked at Ugly Duckling in her arms with a serious expression, and said, Ugly Duckling, you're a duck, not a human. They flew for an entire day. The flathead eagle displayed exceptional endurance, and only rested for half an hour along the way. When the sun was setting in the west, a majestic city appeared before everyone's eyes. Rhoda was the capital of the Roth Empire, and it was also an extremely important city in the history of human development on the Norland continent. It had already been over 10,000 years since it had developed from a small settlement to its current majestic scale. During the war among species 100 years ago, Rhoda served as the rear and command center of the human race. After the conclusion of the war, the former king established the Roth Empire, and set the capital here. After several large-scale expansions, it was known as the largest city on the Norland continent. The city walls were over 100 meters tall and 30 meters thick, and there were countless magic caster runes engraved on them. Even the forest trolls wouldn't be able to easily scale them. Regardless of whether it was in terms of population or size, Rhoda could be regarded as the largest city on the continent. Wow, Teacher Luna, is that Rhoda? It's so big. Amy's eyes widened. Yes, that's Rhoda, my hometown. Luna nodded with excitement on her face. The last time she had been home was over a year ago, but she still found this city to be very adorable. Meg looked at the city with complex emotions. With Alex's memories, he was naturally very familiar with the capital of the Roth Empire. This was a city that symbolized the human race, and it was the place that he had sworn to protect. Ever since he stepped into this city at the age of 15, he gradually rose to the highest level of power in the Roth Empire. However, it was also in this city that he fell into the dust. The flathead eagle landed at the city gate, attracting the attention of many normal people who were lining up to enter the city. Everyone disembarked from the eagle's back, and a horse-drawn carriage had already arrived to pick up Luna. Luna looked at Meg with a smile, and said, Mr. Meg, I'll go back and report to my grandfather first. After you cook for the king, I'll arrange for you to meet him. Would that be all right? Sure. Meg nodded with a smile. He had nothing to do anyway. Chapter 694. What a tall city wall. It's even taller than the city walls of Chaos City. I feel. Amy stood beside the city wall, and looked up. The more she looked up, the more she lost her balance, and fell backward. You can't look at such a tall city wall like that. Meg caught Amy with a smile. When they left Rhoda, Amy was only a few months old, so she definitely wouldn't remember coming here. Father, let's go into the city and have some good food. Amy looked up at Meg with wide, bright blue eyes. Meg looked at Amy's expectant expression, and he almost couldn't help but agree. However, he shook his head in the end, and said, "I'm afraid not today." Carols made his way over to a horse-drawn carriage with a small pagoda emblem on it, and said, "Mr. Meg, please get on this horse-drawn carriage. I'll get someone to take you to the second prince's manor. The king's birthday banquet is the day after tomorrow, and the second prince needs to personally confirm whether you can enter the royal palace." "All right." Meg nodded calmly before carrying Amy onto the horse-drawn carriage. However, his heart began to race. It was all thanks to this second prince that Mag Alex had fallen into such dire straits. Even after so many years, the second prince still didn't seem to have given up on him. Instead, he was most likely still adamant that he was still alive. However, he was now going to the second prince's manor to meet him, and that was akin to sending a lamb into a tiger's den. However, one had to take risks in order to achieve success. Meg was gambling on the fact that even if his nemesis were to stand right in front of him, they wouldn't be able to recognize him as Meg Alex. That way, he wouldn't have to worry about being targeted by others in the future. Meg was completely confident that he would be able to do this. This was because he was Meg Shin, not Meg Alex. All he had to do was be himself and be a candidate for the god of cookery, and no one should be able to link him to the dragon-slaying warrior from all those years ago. "Father, who are we going to meet now?" Amy asked curiously as she lifted the curtains and looked out at the rapidly receding street. Meg looked at Amy with a smile, and said, "We're going to meet the second prince of the Roth Empire. Amy, you have to remember not to give him a nickname. Even if you do, you can't say it in front of him. Otherwise, father could be kidnapped by bad people." "All right, I got it." Amy could tell from Meg's expression that he wasn't joking, and she nodded. However, she quickly pulled out her wand with a serious expression, and said, "Don't worry, father. If any bad guys try to kidnap you, I'll be sure to beat them to a pulp." Meg shook his head, and said, "I know you're very powerful, but we have to keep a low profile in Rodu. We can't let too many people know that you're very powerful. Otherwise, they might force you to leave me. There are still many powerful bad guys in this world." "I understand. I'll become even more powerful. Only then will I be able to protect father." Amy looked at Meg with a serious expression. "Good girl." Meg patted Amy's head with a warm smile, and said, "Don't worry, father will also work hard to become more powerful." The horse-drawn carriage stopped outside a lavish manor, and Meg led Amy out of the carriage. He looked at the familiar scene in front of him with amazement on his face. There were large white stone pillars with intricate carvings on them, a stretch of Western-style domed buildings, a sprawling garden, and a fountain at the very center of the manor. In Rodu, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold, there were only a handful of people aside from the second prince who could afford to own such a massive manor. "Father, look. The water coming out of that toad's mouth is flying so high." Amy pointed at the fountain as she spoke. Meg looked in the direction that Amy was pointing, and discovered that there was clearly a golden dragon in the fountain. However, due to Amy's height, the lower half of the golden dragon's body was obscured by the edge of the fountain, so it looked more like a toad. He picked Amy up in his arms with a smile, and said, "That's a golden dragon. A golden dragon that looks like a toad. It's so ugly." Amy looked at the golden dragon in the fountain with a disdainful expression. Meg took a closer look at the golden dragon condor, and found that it was indeed very ugly. It didn't display any of the fearsome aura of a golden dragon, and if one were to only look at its head, it did indeed resemble a toad. The middle-aged man leading the way turned around with a nervous expression, and said, "Shh, little girl, don't spout nonsense. This is a golden dragon that His Highness personally constructed based on the painting of the golden dragon drawn by His Majesty. If anyone else were to hear what you're saying, they'd lose their heads. Is it that scary?" A slightly fearful expression appeared on Amy's face. She then took another glance at the fountain and said with a conflicted expression, "But it's still so ugly." "All right, let's not talk about it anymore." Meg raised an eyebrow. This was most likely a case of a king who wasn't good at painting and a prince who wasn't good at sculpting, but they liked to do things that they weren't good at, and they liked to show off to others. Along the way, Meg saw a few more strange-looking sculptures. This was the first time that he had learned that the second prince had such a hobby in private. However, compared to the third prince's ability to carve lifelike sculptures out of a piece of wood, Joshua's hobby really did appear to be very amateur. The middle-aged man appeared to be a low-level manager, and he led Meg and Amy into a hall. He looked at the two of them and cautioned, "Wait here for now. His Highness will come over after he's done with his business. Be careful with what you say when you see him, especially you, little girl. Don't say anything that you shouldn't say." "Yes, uncle. I promise I won't say that the golden dragon sculpted by His Highness looks like a toad." Amy nodded obediently. "Thank you." Meg also nodded with a smile. He could sense the manager's good intentions, and he knew that the second prince's residence wasn't just jackals of the same lair. The manager nodded and turned to leave. He shouldn't have said so much, but the little girl was simply too adorable, and it was as if she had never been to the city before. She was curious about everything that she saw, and he was worried that she would offend His Highness, so he said a few more words to remind her. Meg looked around the hall. It was quite spacious, and it appeared to be a guest hall. There were 6 chairs and a coffee table, as well as a bookshelf to the side. The bookshelf was filled with all types of books, and there was a small round table next to the bookshelf that was filled with all types of desserts. On the coffee table next to the main seat, there was a black heavy sword. Tian Du. Meg looked at the sword, and his heart suddenly began to race. Long time no see, Alex. Chapter 695. Meg's gaze only rested on the heavy sword for an instant, and it was as if he hadn't heard the footsteps and the conversation outside the door. He made his way over to the small round table and picked up a yellow pastry. He took a small bite, and his brows furrowed slightly. "Father, is it good?" Amy's attention was also immediately attracted by the pastries on the table, and she made her way over with anticipation and curiosity in her eyes. Meg swallowed the pastry in his mouth, and shook his head as he said, "The osmanthus fragrance is too rich, and the texture is a little too sweet. I can eat 1 or 2 pieces, but if I eat too many, I'll get sick of it." Amy pointed at a small biscuit on another plate, and asked, "What about this one?" "It's a small biscuit that looks like the moon." Meg picked up a thin biscuit, and bit into it gently, producing a crisp crunch. It had the sweet flavor of pumpkin, but it wasn't very rich. Instead, it was quite refreshing, and his eyes lit up as he said, "This pumpkin biscuit is quite good. It's thin and crisp, and the sweetness is just right. Any more and I'll get sick of it, and any less and it'll be bland." This was indeed the best snack Meg had ever tasted after coming to this world, and it just so happened to suit his taste buds. Meg immediately began to look forward to the food and beverage industry in Rodu. "I want a delicious pumpkin biscuit too," Amy yelled as she raised her little hand. "All right, here you go." Meg handed a small biscuit to Amy with a smile. "Is he Alex?" Josh stood at the door as he appraised Meg with narrowed eyes. This man had the same name as Alex, and he also had a daughter who was 3 or 4 years old. He naturally couldn't ignore such a coincidence. However, as someone who loved swords as much as his life, how could Alex remain completely unmoved in the face of the Tiandu sword? Instead, he was more interested in the pastries beside him, and didn't react to the surname Alex at all. If there was anyone in the world who knew Alex the best, it wasn't Irina or Sean. It was him, the person who had once been his friend, but had now become his nemesis. If even Alex knew how to hide his preferences and act, then he wouldn't have been ambushed on the streets of Rodu all those years ago. For some people, everyone in the world liked them, but those who controlled the world hated them. Therefore, they had to die. Also, Alex likes sweets. Looks like it's just someone with the same name. Josh's gaze lingered on Amy for a moment before he made his way into the hall. He turned to Meg, and asked, "Are you the Meg that Carol's recommended?" Meg turned to Josh and nodded in a manner that was neither haughty nor humble as he said, "My name is Meg, and I was invited to Rhoda by Ambassador Carol's to celebrate the King's birthday." "It's an honor to meet you, Your Highness." Amy was happily eating a plate of pumpkin biscuits and had no time to care about anything else. It was very refreshing to step on their peers. Meg brought out the condiments one by one, and placed them in the positions that he was accustomed to. He then picked up the Kirin carp that was still swimming happily in the water tank beside him. He knocked the Kirin carp unconscious with the back of his knife, and the thin and long knife easily scraped away the fine and hard scales. He then made a series of cuts on the fish's body, and pulled out a series of fish bones. In the blink of an eye, a pile of small fish bones had appeared beside the stove. "Ha, did you see that? That's the worst way to deal with Kirin carp. The scales are the most delicious part of the Kirin carp, and it's also the reason why it's so beautiful." Not only did he remove the scales, he also cut the fish into a mess. When he cooks it later, it'll definitely be reduced to a pile of minced meat. "There's no beauty or value to it at all," a slightly portly chef said to the apprentice beside him. As the chef who was the most proficient in cooking fish, Matthew's words were naturally well received. It was indeed unheard of to deal with Kirin carp in such a manner, and all of the apprentices immediately began to fawn over him. With such a taste, it's no wonder that he can't cook a good fish. After cleaning the fish, Meg marinated it with condiments and set it aside. He then pursed his lips and said, "The most fishy part of the Kirin carp is its scales. Furthermore, the fine and sealed scales will prevent the fish's flavor from seeping into the fish, and at the same time, lock the fishy flavor within the fish, making it extremely bland and pungent. As for removing the bones, that's a skill that most people can't learn." Meg's voice wasn't very loud, but it was enough to silence all of the chatter. All of the chefs wore contemplative expressions, while the apprentices carefully observed each other's expressions. Matthew's face immediately flushed red upon hearing this. He didn't think that Meg would dare to refute him in public. He pointed a finger at Meg and said, You're spouting nonsense. I've been cooking fish for over 30 years, and the amount of fish I've cooked is more than the amount of rice you've eaten. Do you think I'm inferior to you in terms of experience?" Meg nodded with a smile and replied, "Hard work and dedication are qualities worthy of respect. You've been walking in the wrong direction for 30 years, and the experience you've accumulated is also worthy of respect." You. Matthew's entire body was trembling with rage, but he couldn't find any words to refute Tang Wulin's words. In the end, he waved his hand and said, "You've got a glib tongue. Let's see what kind of fish you can cook." Meg wasn't the type to let others take advantage of him, nor was he the type to let others take advantage of him. He looked at the chubby chef's helpless expression, and his mood immediately improved significantly. This reminded him of the way he had ridiculed those chefs in the past, and the soul of his venomous tongue was awakening. While the fish was marinating, Meg prepared the steak and braised chicken. When the bottle of wine was opened, Meg could clearly feel the eyes of everyone in the kitchen light up. "This won't do. In addition to the 5 million appearance fee, I also have to pay for the spices and equipment. Just this bottle of red wine alone costs at least 200,000. Meg stuffed the cork back into the bottle, and thought to himself, "I almost made a loss." The fish was roasting in the oven, the chicken was stewing in the casserole, and the steak was frying in the wok. Meg was cooking 3 dishes at the same time. The aroma of the beef and red wine wreaked havoc in the kitchen, and the aroma of the braised chicken began to drift along the lid of the wok. Only the fish in the oven was still unknown. However, everyone in the kitchen had already shut their mouths. Nothing could be more resounding, crisp and silencing than being slapped in the face with real strength. Besides chefs, those who wanted to be chefs had stayed in the kitchen for a long time. However, none of the dishes cooked by a chef could make them want to smell it forcefully and swallow their saliva uncontrollably. However, Meg had done it. It smells so good. I've never smelled meat that smells so good. Regardless of whether it's chicken or beef, they're all incredibly delicious, an apprentice exclaimed. An apprentice sighed with emotion. Everyone around him nodded in agreement. They all stood on their tiptoes, trying to see what Mag had put in the pot. Why was it giving off such an alluring aroma? Even if the beef and chicken are delicious, the fish might not be as good. Matthew harumphed coldly, and his fists were already unconsciously clenched. Ding! Chapter 697. Matthew was a renowned chef in Rodu. Back when he was the head chef of the Moisen Fish restaurant beside the Moisen River, there would always be a long line of customers lining up every day just to taste his signature fish. If there were any esteemed guests, an all-fish feast would be the most popular. Back then, the second prince had recruited him to his manor after eating an all-fish feast, and he was responsible for cooking fish. As such, Matthew was extremely confident that even the master chefs in the royal palace wouldn't dare to say that their fish was more delicious than his. After all, the second prince had personally said that his fish was more delicious than the ones he had eaten in the royal palace. However, Matthew was still rooted to the spot when Meg opened the door of the square oven. The intense spicy aroma of the grilled fish swept through the entire kitchen like a tornado. The intense spicy aroma made one's eyes narrow, but the aroma of the grilled fish made one salivate involuntarily, and they wanted to open their eyes wide to see just what kind of grilled fish it was. This was a peculiar aroma. The spicy aroma of the fish wasn't overshadowed in the slightest. Instead, it seemed to have been magnified. There was no fishy smell in the air, only the purest aroma of the fish. Even if it's grilled fish, how can it taste like this? Even the intense spicy aroma can't mask the aroma of the fish. How did he do it? Matthew felt as if his heart had been struck by an earthquake. The fish that Meg had cooked had completely upended his understanding of how to cook fish. It was completely different from his cooking methods, but the aroma emanating from it was completely unmatched. It stings my eyes. But it's also so fragrant. The spicy aroma of the fish is like a demon, infinitely magnifying the aroma, making you want to taste it right away. Chef Matthew's fish is also quite delicious, but it seems to be a little lacking in terms of aroma. All of the chefs were discussing among themselves as they inhaled the aroma of the fish, and they were already salivating. It stings your eyes, doesn't it? That's right. This is 3 portions of insanely spicy sauce, so it's only natural that it stings your eyes. Meg's lips curled up slightly. He and the second prince were mortal enemies, and he couldn't defeat him for the time being. However, it wasn't his style to not do anything, so this small gesture was a sign of respect. His Highness the second prince has arrived. At this moment, a voice sounded from outside. A young man in a luxurious blue robe walked into the kitchen. Your Highness. Everyone in the kitchen hurriedly bowed to Joshua to show their respect. This smell. However, Josh didn't pay any attention to them. He was staring intently at the roasting pan that Mag was taking out from the oven with a pair of large gloves on. His eyes narrowed as he exclaimed, "Is this fish?" Meg placed the simmering spicy grilled fish in front of Josh with a smile, and said, "Have some braised chicken and rice first, Your Highness. The spicy grilled fish has a slightly stronger flavor, so it's best to leave it for last." Josh picked up a piece of chicken with his chopsticks, and everyone's eyes were focused on the braised chicken before him. The golden chicken pieces were of an even color, and there were no blemishes at all. The potatoes were soft and tender, but they didn't fall apart. The lettuce was still tender and green, and the red and green peppers were interspersed among them. The rich aroma of chicken and shiitake mushrooms wafted through the air, and just the sight of it made one salivate involuntarily. The evenly sliced chicken pieces were able to perfectly absorb the flavor of the condiments and broth, and a layer of bright red broth was slowly being fed into the mouth. The broth that enveloped the chicken pieces was imbued with the rich aroma of chicken broth and mushrooms, and the delectable flavor instantly brought a sense of ecstasy to one's taste buds. It was as if one had been enveloped by chicken broth and shiitake mushrooms, unable to extricate themselves. Josh gently bit into the chicken, and the texture of the meat was extremely tender. The flavor of the condiments and shiitake mushrooms had perfectly seeped into the meat, elevating the flavor to a whole new level. Josh's eyes had completely lit up, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "The flavor is superb, and the texture is superb." He picked up a spoon with his left hand and drank a spoonful of broth. The aroma of the chicken broth was enhanced to the extreme by the shiitake mushrooms, and he felt as if all of the pores on his body had opened up as a warm and comfortable feeling spread through his entire body. After that, he scooped up a spoonful of rice. There was a small moon within each grain of rice, and it was exuding a faint fragrance. The rice was quite chewy, and after biting into the small moon, the aroma became even richer, and the more he chewed, the sweeter it became. Chapter 698. As the chefs of the Second Prince's manor, no one knew better than them just how picky the Second Prince was when it came to food. All of them were renowned chefs in Rodu, but none of them dared to say that the Second Prince would finish all of their dishes. In fact, it was quite normal for him to not even take a single bite of their food. But now, the Second Prince, who usually ate slowly, was holding a pair of chopsticks in one hand and a spoon in the other. He was eating so happily that it completely overturned the image they had in their hearts. Is this braised chicken really that delicious? The same question popped up in everyone's minds at the same time. Matthew's expression darkened slightly upon hearing this. If Meg's dish was so popular with the Second Prince, then there was a very good chance that he would be kept as a chef at the Second Prince's manor even if his dish was unpalatable. In order to be a chef at the Second Prince's manor, one only had to be proficient in one dish, and the other dishes would be taken care of by better chefs. He was only trying to show off his expertise in front of his apprentices, but he didn't think that he would run into someone as stubborn as Meg. As such, he had no choice but to bite the bullet. The kitchen of the Second Prince's manor wasn't a place for everyone to work for. If there was someone who could cook better than you, then you would be replaced. These were simple rules, but they were quite cruel when put into practice. Matthew was used to this kind of leisurely work, and he was a cut above the rest when he went out, so he didn't want to be kicked out just like that. Matthew's apprentices were also quite nervous. If Matthew were to be fired, then they would have to leave as well. The Second Prince's manor wasn't a place that anyone could just join, and no one would be willing to do so. Everyone looked on in silence as Josh ate, and the sound of gulping could be heard from time to time. The bowl of chicken and rice was finished in the blink of an eye. Josh put down his spoon and looked at the empty bowl in front of him with a hint of surprise and yearning for more. He raised his head and gave Meg a thumbs up as he said, "That was unbelievably delicious." If there were any doubts in his heart about the relationship between Meg and Alex in the past, then all of those doubts had been completely erased. If even Alex could cook such delicious food, then he would be able to slay dragons with his Tiandu sword. He was a good chef, but he definitely wasn't a good knight. He had seen many chefs with superb culinary skills. Other than their superb culinary skills, very few of them were able to take care of everything else. Only with enough focus could one reach the pinnacle of a certain field. This was a law that was rarely broken. Therefore, the relationship between Meg and Alex was indeed just a coincidence. Chapter 699. The scorching spiciness was like a ball of fire wreaking havoc in his mouth, but it was also like scorching lava, instantly rendering his taste buds numb and numb. Joshua had never tasted such spiciness before, and he felt as if he had been poisoned in that instant. His body temperature rose sharply, and sweat poured down his face like water. Even the air coming out of his nose had turned into white smoke. "Are you all right, Your Highness? Someone, go get a doctor." Everyone in the restaurant hurriedly asked. Some of them were busy pouring water, while others were already preparing to rush out of the restaurant to call for help. "Sure enough, it's impossible to eat." Matthew's eyes immediately lit up, and he was immediately relieved. Meg's first two dishes had been praised by His Highness, but as long as the fish he cooked wasn't approved by His Highness, then his position in the household wouldn't be threatened. Just as Joshua was about to spit out the fish, the rich aroma of the fish suddenly blossomed in his mouth. It was as if rain had suddenly descended upon a desert after a long drought, and the tender fish melted in his mouth. This was an incomparably delicious flavor, and it blossomed in the firelight, completely suppressing the scorching spiciness. His numb tongue and taste buds were rejuvenated, and they seemed to have become more sensitive. Every single taste bud was hungrily experiencing the freshness of the fish, and the flavor became even more distinct and delicious amid the spiciness. After swallowing the fish, the scalding sensation slid down his throat, like a red-hot soldering iron sliding down his esophagus. However, it turned into a warm current in his body and spread to his limbs and bones. It was as if he had taken a comfortable hot bath. Just a small mouthful of fish was enough to make Joshua experience a roller coaster ride in that short span of time. Pain and deliciousness existed side by side, but in the end, it all transformed into a carefree and comfortable feeling. Just that one mouthful of fish was enough to satisfy him. His throat was still scorching hot, and his tongue was becoming numb again. However, Joshua felt as if his hands were uncontrollably picking up another piece of fish before placing it into his mouth. The deliciousness of the fish was able to suppress the scorching sensation, but every time the fish entered his mouth, the spiciness would intensify. The fish was so delicious that it was difficult for him to part with his chopsticks. One mouthful after another, it almost became an endless cycle. "Hold on. His Highness seems to like this fish very much." The old chef called out to his apprentice, who had already reached the entrance. He looked at the red-faced Joshua, but his chopsticks didn't stop moving for even a single moment, and he was feeling rather conflicted. Even he had never seen the second prince so fond of anyone's dishes. How is this possible? Matthew stumbled, and his face turned deathly pale. Fortunately, the apprentice beside him was quick enough to support him. Back then, the second prince would often eat his fish, and the second prince would often take a single bite out of the fish, of the fish, of course, of the second prince's every day, and every day, and the second prince's every day. He often comforted himself that it was because of the recent weather that His Highness didn't want to eat fish. But now that he saw His Highness eating mouthful after mouthful of fish without the slightest intention of stopping, the thoughts in his heart were completely shattered, and he was filled with a sense of loss. It looked like it was time for him to pack up and leave. All of the chefs in the restaurant also wore similar expressions. Even though the fish was so unbearably spicy, the second prince was still eating with such gusto. It was quite clear just how delicious the fish was. The second prince had always been a gentle and refined man, and he was eating with such gusto. Where did this guy come from? All of the chefs were looking at Meg with bewilderment and curiosity in their hearts. All of their disdain toward him had completely disappeared. There was a chain of disdain in the world of chefs. At the top of the chain were the chefs of Rodu, followed by the Elven race, and then Chaos City. In the eyes of many of the chefs of Rodu, the chefs of Chaos City were only slightly better than orcs in terms of overall standards. This was why there was such a huge uproar when the second prince announced that he was going to invite a chef from Chaos City to cook for the king. However, this Meg had completely upended everyone's understanding of the chefs of Chaos City. Josh really couldn't stop eating. Firstly, the grilled fish really was extraordinarily delicious. It was as if it possessed some kind of magical power that was releasing an irresistible temptation. Of course, the most important thing was that it was simply too spicy. If he were to stop eating, he would feel as if his mouth and throat had been set on fire. Taking a bite of the fish was like pouring a scoop of ice water onto a fire, but after he stopped, that scorching sensation would become even more intense. This was an indescribable feeling. Furthermore, what was even more amazing was that the fish didn't have any small fish bones, so there was no need to worry about eating any fish bones. Even the time needed to remove the fish bones had been skipped. After losing the opportunity to stop eating, it was even more difficult for Josh to extricate himself from this state. Only after he finished the entire side of the fish did he finally put down his chopsticks. He waved a hand at the servant who was holding a cup of water, and downed the entire cup in one gulp before heaving a long sigh of relief. When Josh entered, he was wearing a luxurious robe with his long hair tied up. But now, his robe was drenched in sweat and stuck to his body. His long hair had also lost its elegance and was stuck to his forehead. He looked a little wretched, like a refugee who had just escaped from a disaster. "I heard from Master Carols that your highness likes spicy food, so I added a bit more chili when I was grilling the fish. Is it to your liking?" Meg blamed Carols with a nervous and expectant look on his face. However, he was feeling extremely elated, as if he had drunk a bottle of ice cream in a desert with the temperature at 48 degrees Celsius. "This is what you get for taking Amy hostage 3 years ago. I'll make you taste 4 times, 5 times, and even 6 times the insanely spicy food in the future." Josh felt like he was becoming a little dehydrated. After swallowing the entire fish, his limbs were feeling rather sore and feeble, as if he had just come out of a high-temperature steamer. His stomach was still feeling rather scorching, and he couldn't help but salivate at the sight of the remaining half of the grilled fish. A contemplative look appeared on Josh's face upon hearing Meg's words. If any other chef had put him in such a disheveled state, then he would have definitely gotten rid of them after the fact. However, the grilled fish cooked by Meg had left him sweating profusely, and it was irresistibly delicious. On top of that, the spiciness seemed to be the essence of the dish. As such, he didn't have much to say about it. After all, many people knew that he liked spicy food, and there was nothing he could say about the grilled fish that Meg had cooked to cater to his tastes. Thus, he smiled in a carefree manner, and said, "Mr. Meg's grilled fish is the most delicious grilled fish I've ever tasted, and it's also the most spicy grilled fish I've ever tasted." "You're far too kind, Your Highness. If you like, I can cook for you in the next few days," Meg replied with a modest smile. Chapter 700. I can't believe he's going to cook for the king just like that. What else can he do? When have you ever seen His Highness eat so much in one meal? It must be delicious. I heard that he defeated head chef Beat from Dukas restaurant in Chaos City. He really is very powerful. After Josh left, the tense atmosphere in the restaurant was instantly lifted. Everyone had thought that this was going to be a very complex evaluation process, and all of the chefs were prepared to step forward to give their opinions. In the end, Josh finished almost all 3 dishes on his own, and decided that Meg would be the chef at the king's birthday banquet. He didn't even ask for the opinions of the chefs, which was completely contrary to everyone's expectations. Father is so awesome. Amy looked at Meg with reverence in her eyes. Let's go and have some food. Meg patted Amy's head with a smile, and felt as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his heart. The 3 portions of insanely spicy dish were very satisfying. Furthermore, judging from Josh's performance, he had most likely already drawn a clear line between him and Alex. Thus, he had achieved half of his objective on this trip to Rodu. Can we eat Father's food? Amy asked with an expectant look in her eyes. Of course. The braised chicken and rice is enough for 3 people, and I can also cook a steak for Amy. Meg nodded with a smile as he led Amy out of the restaurant. That's great. Amy yelled with elation. Meow, Ugly Duckling was a little anxious as if it were frantically hinting at something. You have a share too, Meg said with a smile. Ugly Duckling, if you pretend to faint the next time we fly, I won't give you anything to eat. Amy poked Ugly Duckling's head with a disdainful look. Meow, Ugly Duckling pursed its lips in an aggrieved manner as if it were saying that it really did faint. You can't faint even if you do. Amy added. Meow. Ugly Duckling lowered its head with a sheepish expression. Meg looked on with a smile. Ugly Duckling now had a pair of white wings on its back, but judging from its increasingly round body, it didn't look like it could fly. He still found it hard to imagine a round orange cat being carried by 2 small white wings. The picture was too beautiful to look at. Meg took Amy out of the restaurant. Matthew, who was a little pale, quickly walked to the table, grabbed the chopsticks that the second prince had used before, and put a piece of fish into his mouth. Hot. 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 As soon as the fish entered his mouth, there was only one word left in Matthew's mind. The strong spiciness seemed to have been concentrated and released in his mouth, exploding in an instant. The strong spiciness even made him feel dizzy and suffocated. His face turned red, and a white mist rose above his head. This was definitely not an ordinary chili because no matter how much chili was added, it would not be so abnormally spicy. Amy also reached out to protect her bowl with a serious expression, and said, I have to eat mine too. Uncle Fatty, I think you should cook for yourself. My name is Matthew, and I apologize for offending you earlier. After tasting that spicy grilled fish, I've come to realize the disparity between you and me. I'm ashamed of what I've said, and I hope you can forgive me. Matthew extended a deep bow toward Meg. Meg heaved a sigh of relief as he released his bowl. As long as Matthew wasn't here to steal his food, he nodded, and said, It's great that you're willing to correct your mistakes. Amy also released her bowl before picking up a small spoon to dig into her braised chicken and rice. Matthew was a little perplexed by Meg's words, but he still hesitated momentarily before asking, There's something I'd like to ask. How did you cook such delicious fish, Mr. Meg? I've been cooking fish for 30 years, and I've always focused on cooking fish with all my heart, yet I still haven't been able to cook a fish that's exceptional. Why is that? You've been cooking fish for 30 years, yet you don't even think that it's exceptional enough. What a failure you've lived your entire life. Meg pursed his lips. This kind of perseverance was indeed commendable, but if a chef couldn't even approve of his own cooking, then how was he going to make his customers approve of his cooking? Chapter 701. Well, it seems like Mr. Mac really went on a long trip this time. I've been waiting at the door for a whole day, but I haven't seen him or the little owner. Although Mr. Mac wrote a leave request, I'm still so angry. If I were his boss, I would never allow him to leave. 5 days. Heavens, will I be able to live until Boss Mag comes back? Put down your biscuit before you talk. At the door of Mamie's, a few customers were looking at the leave request on the door. They were all crestfallen and disappointed. Let's go. Mr. Mac is a man of his word. If he says he'll be back in 5 days, then even if he comes back on the 4th day, he won't open until the 5th day. I'm going to an ice cream shop to get some ice cream to soothe my broken heart. Harrison got into the carriage with his hand over his heart, looking hurt. Boss, what should we do? Mr. Mac isn't home. I don't think we can eat the holy Ruggiemo. Mond asked Sargeras with a conflicted expression as he carried a large sack. The other lava demons also had similar expressions. Sargeras looked at the closed door of the restaurant, and rubbed his bald head as he loudly said, "Well, we have to understand Boss Mag. The 3rd batch of warriors from our tribe will be here in a few days. Let's take this opportunity to save some money so that we can treat them with the most sumptuous Ruggiemo." "What shall we eat tonight?" Keel asked. Sargeras thought for a moment, then waved his hand. "Let's go. Let's eat chicken tonight." In a big blacksmith's shop in Aden Square, strong dwarven blacksmiths were swinging heavy hammers and forging weapons. The temperature was hot, and the sound of hammering was endless. Cyril was napping on the table in the next room with cotton in his ears. He was not affected by the noise at all. At this moment, a young man who looked like a butler walked in quickly. He stood by the table and said excitedly, "Young master, according to the news from Blue Suede, they haven't even sold a single piece of clothing. Furthermore, other than the workers who tidy up the warehouse, they've also hired more than 10 tailors to make clothes in the shop at the same time. Furthermore, they're paying double the salary. Just hiring these tailors costs a lot of money a day. Blue Suede is getting more and more unable to make ends meet." "What?" Cyril pulled the cotton out of his ears and stood up. The butler said excitedly, "The Suede is still losing money, but we've received 2 big orders since you took over. As long as we can finish the work on time, we'll make at least 1,000,000 copper coins after deducting the salary. We'll win this profit competition." "Great!" Cyril clapped his hands happily. He paced around the room and said to himself excitedly, "Gloria, let's see how you're going to compete with me. The Moreton Manor will always be mine. When I succeed the throne, I'll banish your whole family from the manor." Meg felt that it would be very difficult for him to become a saint in this life, as he was still unable to calmly discuss how to be a good fish with a person who had just been dissing him like a madman and wanting nothing more than to stomp on him. Then, he had to pat his head like a life coach and tell him that the future was his. Therefore, after saying those words, he looked at Matthew's face, which had just faded, and became rosy again. He felt a lot better. Matthew glowered at Mag with a blush on his face, and his clenched fists were trembling. He had already lowered himself to the extreme. Even back when he had begged the head chef of the Mobo Fish restaurant to teach him how to cook fish, he had only lowered himself to this level. However, 10 years later, he had repaid all of the humiliation he had suffered. However, what right did Meg have to turn him down? He was clearly just a little bit away from success. If he could tell him the secret, he would definitely be able to cook a fish that was even more delicious than his and make the second prince fall in love with his fish again. Meg looked at Matthew with a smile, and said, "My apologies, but I don't accept disciples who are too old and don't have any talent. If you don't mind, can you stand a little further away? You're interrupting my meal." Matthew gritted his teeth as he looked at Meg with a cold expression, and said, "Humph. Life is full of ups and downs, don't look down on me just because I'm old and poor. Today, I'll make a 3-year agreement with you. 3 years from now, we'll have a cooking contest in Rodu, and we'll compete in cooking fish." Mag rubbed his glabella with a speechless expression, and said, "Uncle, don't play the main character. You're obviously not the main character at all. 3 years later, people might have already forgotten about you." I. Matthew's face became redder and redder, and it was as if he were about to spit fire. Meg wore a serious expression as he said, I still suggest that you cook a chicken. Look at your disposition, you're so close to a fire chicken. Perhaps you'll be able to come up with some new inspiration and cook the legendary Ken beet chicken. I'll be waiting for you in Rodu in 3 years. If you don't come, then I'll announce to the entire world that you're inferior to me as a chicken. Tui, as a fish. Matthew turned and left. I'm being serious here. You really are suited to cook the chicken. Meg didn't forget to yell at Matthew's departing figure. Matthew almost stumbled as he made his way to the door. He only managed to steady himself by grabbing onto the door frame before departing with an enraged look on his face. Everyone in the restaurant was looking at Meg with unfriendly expressions. This guy from Chaos City was simply too despicable. How could he use such a method to force Matthew to leave? Everyone felt as if they had a common enemy, and were ready to retaliate at any moment. However, after Matthew left, Meg lost interest in the other chefs. He enjoyed a hearty dinner with Amy, and only then did he take Amy back to the living quarters that had been arranged for them. These things were going to be used in the royal palace the day after tomorrow, and Meg wasn't sure if there would be any villains who would try to plot against him. He wasn't prepared to sacrifice his life for this trip, so he naturally had to be careful. In the bushes outside Amy's, a black-robed man said to Seuss in a low voice, Captain, according to our investigation, the owner of this restaurant is around 30 years old. He came here over 3 years ago, and he has a half-elf daughter who's around 4 years old. According to our recent investigation, he's the best match for Alex. Where is he? Seuss gripped his staff tightly under his loose robe. I've already investigated, and the owner of this restaurant and his daughter left for Rodu with Ambassador Carols this morning. It seems that His Highness has something to do with this, the black-robed man replied. They went to Rodu. A hint of surprise appeared in Seuss's voice. After a brief silence, he shook his head, and said, I'll report this to His Highness. Keep a close eye on this restaurant, and report back to me immediately if you discover anything. The wind forced the bright moon hung high in the sky. The melodious sound of a flute rang out, and a snowy white deer galloped out from the depths of the forest. A pair of translucent wings appeared on its back, and it rose into the air as a river of stars appeared beneath its feet. Chapter 702. On their first night in Rodu, Meg had thought that he would have trouble sleeping, but he fell asleep as soon as he lay down on the bed. The next morning, he was woken up by a knock on his door. He put on his clothes and went out, only to find that it was the butler who had led them here the night before. His name was Kaido, and he didn't have much power in the second prince's manor. In this massive manor, Meg was naturally just a small fry. Even though he was going to cook for the king the next day, in Josh's eyes, he was still just an ordinary chef. Did you sleep well last night, Mr. Meg? Kaido turned to Meg with a smile. He had heard about what had happened the night before, and the second prince was very pleased with this man who was far less adorable than his daughter. As such, he was going to cook for the king's birthday the next day, and had become one of the second prince's favorites. Yes, I did very well. Meg nodded with a smile. He looked at the time to find that it was only just past 6 in the morning, and he was wondering why Josh had woken him up so early. Kaido seemed to have detected Meg's confusion, and he hurriedly explained, Mr. Meg, His Highness told me yesterday that he wants to have your steak and braised chicken and rice for breakfast, so I came to visit you early in the morning. I see. Then please wait for a moment, and I'll go to the kitchen after I talk to my daughter. Meg nodded. Josh sure was a big shot, ordering food early in the morning. After entering the room, Amy was just opening her eyes in a daze, and he made his way over to her with a smile as he said, Amy, I'm going to cook now. If you wake up later, wait for me in the room, and I'll take you to eat. All right. Amy nodded before rolling over and falling asleep again with Ugly Duckling in her arms that Meg had picked up from under the bed. Did His Highness say that he only wants steak and braised chicken and rice? Meg asked as he followed Kaido into the kitchen. That's right, His Highness told me that he only wants steak and braised chicken and rice. Kaido nodded and said with a smile, Mr. Meg's culinary skills are truly amazing. I've never seen His Highness specifically point out whose dishes he wants to eat. It's a pity that you don't want the spicy grilled fish, Meg said with a wishful expression. Huh? Kaido didn't understand. Meg didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he changed the topic and asked Kaido about the situation in the mansion. Kaido was certain that Meg would be kept in the second prince's residence. Moreover, he was certain that Meg would become a very popular person. Therefore, he told him everything he knew. He didn't have any doubts at all. She resisted the urge to drug Josh, and instead made steak and braised chicken and rice for Josh. After that, she made breakfast for herself, Amy, and Ugly Duckling. She then grabbed a lunchbox from the kitchen and put all the dishes into it. When she returned to the courtyard with the lunchbox, she was stunned when she opened the door. In the room, Crassus and Amy were sitting at the table, staring at one another. Ugly Duckling was dozing off in Amy's arms, and it still hadn't opened its eyes. What brings you here, Master Crassus? Meg walked in with the lunchbox in hand, and a surprised look appeared on his face. Crassus took the lunchbox from Meg's hands without any hesitation, and said as he opened it, I set off in the middle of the night in order to make it in time for your breakfast. But the second prince's mansion, I can even enter the royal palace whenever I want to, this is nothing compared to the second prince's mansion. Crassus placed a plate of steak in front of him, and nodded with satisfaction before placing another plate in front of Amy. He then looked at the 2 plates of braised chicken and rice, and a hint of disappointment appeared on his face as he said, Why isn't there any Yangzhou fried rice? Shouldn't you be eating something lighter this early in the morning? Meg handed the cutlery to Crassus with a smile, and said, Yangzhou fried rice requires too many ingredients. This isn't Amy's, after all, so I can't cook it here. Please make do with this, Master Crassus. He then placed a plate of braised chicken and rice in front of Amy, as well as a plate for himself. As for Ugly Duckling, he was going to place a plate on the ground for it to eat. That won't do. We're going to do something big today, so we have to eat our fill. Crassus placed Ugly Duckling's small plate of braised chicken and rice in front of himself, and scooped a spoonful into his mouth as he nodded, and said, It's delicious. Meow, Ugly Duckling had already woken up after smelling the delicious food, and it looked up at Crassus with an aggrieved expression. It blinked its eyes as it looked up at Amy, and tears were already welling up in its eyes. All right, I'll leave some for you later. Amy stroked Ugly Duckling's head before picking up her cutlery and began to eat. Meow, Ugly Duckling was immediately elated again, and it looked up at Amy with eager eyes as she ate. Meg shook his head in resignation at Crassus' attempt to steal Ugly Duckling's food, and he also sat down to eat. However, he was a little skeptical about Amy leaving Ugly Duckling any leftovers. 15 minutes later, Amy looked down at the empty plate, and said apologetically, Aw. Ugly Duckling, I'm sorry. Father's food is too delicious, and I didn't pay attention to it before I finished it. Meow, Ugly Duckling meowed weakly as it lay on Amy's lap. It was already a dead cat, and there was nothing it could do. It didn't even have the courage to meow loudly. Its life as a cat was such a failure. Eat. Meg took out Ugly Duckling's special plate from his bag, and poured the untouched chicken and rice from the corner of the bowl onto the plate with a smile. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling immediately came back to life, and slid down from Amy's lap. It rubbed its little head against Meg's calf, and only then did it begin to eat happily. After finishing the last piece of beef on the plate, Crassus put down his cutlery with a hint of longing in his eyes. I'm going to take Amy to the Magus Tower. Do you want to come with us? The Magus Tower. Meg was a little surprised. Crassus conjured up a mirror, and took out a small knife to trim his beard, which had already grown quite a bit. That's right. I left something there, and I'm going to take it back. I'll also take my precious disciple to slap those guys in the face. I haven't slapped anyone in the face for 3 days, and my hands are itching. I'm bored, so I'll come with you. Slapping people in the face is going to be fun. Meg smiled. Apart from Crassus, there were very few people in the world who dared to say that they were going to the Magus Tower to slap people in the face. Slapping people in the face. I love it. Should I use my fist or my palm? Amy was also very eager to give it a try. Let's go, then. When we get there, little Amy can slap people in the face however she wants. Crassus put away his knife, and pushed open the door. Okay. Amy picked up Ugly Duckling, which was still lying in front of the plate, and tucked it under her armpit, and quickly followed after him. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.